In this video, you're going to go from a complete beginner to mastering full-stack web development by building a dynamic travel planner app using the most up-to-date tech stack. This course is designed specifically for beginners, whether you've never touched NextJS or Prisma before, or you're aiming to level up your full-stack skills. You'll learn everything from user authentication and managing your Neon Postgres database to creating visually stunning and interactive interfaces with Tailwind CSS. We'll cover every step, starting with securely authenticating users, defining Prisma schemas for efficient database management, and building interactive pages where users can plan their trips, create detailed itineraries, visualize their journeys on Google Maps, and even showcase their travel history on an engaging 3D globe highlighting each country they've visited. We'll use NextJS for its fast server-side rendering and powerful React capabilities, Prisma ORM for its intuitive, type-safe database interactions, and Tailwind CSS to rapidly design beautiful and responsive UIs. We'll also be leveraging Neon, a serverless PostgreSQL database ideal for our project because it scales seamlessly, offering instant database branching for effortless testing and development. And it also handles data storage separately from compute, keeping our app performant and cost-effective. Neon simplifies backend management, letting us focus on creating the project itself. Now, if you want to check out the entire code for this project, it's going to be in the description together with the starter version if you are interested in that. And if you're interested in checking out my React.js course for beginners, it will also be in the description. So with that in mind, let's get into the video. Okay, everyone. So let's get started building the project. The first thing we need to do is we need to start our project. So I'm going to be using npm here, and I'm going to be running npx create next app. And it's going to ask us for a name of the project. I'm just going to put a dot so that it builds the project in the directory we're inside of. I do want to use TypeScript. I do want to use ESLint, yes for Tailwind, no for source directory, yes for app router and TurboPack, and no for import alias. Now it finished creating our project. We're going to just close this up. So we want to run our project on the localhost 3000. So I'm going to run npm run dev. As you can see, we now have access to it on localhost 3000. I'm going to open it up. And as you can see, we have the initial code that appears when you build a Next.js application. Now, let's come back here. I want to install all of the different packages that we are going to have on this project. And since technically there are a lot of them, I'm going to copy and paste the package.json into this package.json. You guys will obviously have access to it down below if you're interested in it. And we're going to run npm install to actually install it. But don't worry, I'm going to go over each package that we are installing and what its purpose is. Okay, so now I have pasted here all of the different packages that we need. So let's start with the main ones, right? We're going to be using, first of all, Prisma as an ORM to communicate with our database. We're going to be using next-auth as the authentication provider for our project. So we're going to need an adapter to connect Prisma to next-auth. And also in this project, we are going to have images that we're going to allow users to upload for example, different trips that they want to have. They might want to put a background image just to remember what trip that is. So for that, we need to have a place where we're going to store those images. And I chose the upload thing for this project. It was made by a good friend of the channel, Theo. You guys might know him. He's a YouTuber as well. And obviously this is not sponsored at all by him. I thought I would try it out. And actually I liked the experience of using it. Obviously you could also use other alternatives to image storage such as Cloudinary and even Supabase storage and other options like that. However, in this tutorial, we are using upload thing. Also, we're going to be using React Google Maps to deal with all of the Google Maps API stuff and some pre-made UI components that come from Radix UI. Also, we're going to have some drag and drop functionality, so you guys are going to learn that. And for that, we need the D&D packages, just as you see over here. So now that we understand all of the different dependencies we need, I'm going to run the command npm install, and we will be able to install all of the packages into our project. Now we are done and we have all of them in our node load modules, I want to do one more thing as well that is important to do before we actually start coding, and that is to add all of the necessary colors that we're going to have in this project. So obviously we're using Tailwind for this project, and because of that, we're going to define a bunch of colors and classes that we might want to reuse throughout our project. So in order to do that, I'm going to delete all of this stuff over here, and I'm going to replace it with this. So what this does is it creates, first of all, a bunch of colors. And what this does is, first of all, it creates a bunch of colors. As you can see over here, it has the light version of the colors and the dark version. We're not going to have a light and dark theme for this project. However, if you do want to do that, you already have the color set up for you over here. We're using OKLCH, which, if you might not know, it's just another way for you to define colors similar to RGB or hexadecimal. The LCH in OKLCH stands for lightness, chroma, and hue. And technically, some people find colors defined in OKLCH easier to understand and predict than something like RGB or HSL or hexadecimal. So I personally think that it doesn't matter. You could also just go ahead and switch the colors of this theme if you want to for your own project. So we first just define colors for different elements we're going to use, such as the backgrounds, the cards, texts like buttons, inputs, rings, borders, and so on. And then we just applied some generic classes to everything as well. So now we can start building the project. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to go to our layout.tsx. This is obviously the layout, the root layout for our project. And it's a perfect place for us to add our Navbar, which is where we're going to be able to authenticate a user or not. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to create here a Navbar component, and I need to actually create that component. So I'm going to create here a folder, and I need to actually create that component. So I'm going to create a folder outside of the app folder called components. And in here, I'm going to create our navbar.tsx. Now to start, we're going to export default function navbar. Then we want to return a nav. Now we're going to use that nav as the container for our navbar. So what we want to do to it is we first want to give it a color. We're going to apply some class names, and we're going to give it a BG white color. Then I want to apply some medium shadow to this navbar. I'm going to add some vertical padding to it, a border at the bottom, and I'm going to make that border have the color gray 200. Now before we continue anything further, let's just import this component. We should see that now if I go to this, we can see the navbar appearing at the top. Now, if we go back here, let's go back to the navbar. I want to add another container inside of this. So I'm going to add a div, and on this div, we're going to add a class name that is going to be called container. Then we're setting a margin X to be auto. Let me also close this up, and we're going to set the display to flex. Let's justify between, center the items, and I'm going to put a padding on the X direction to be 6. Now on a large screen, we're going to make that padding to be 8. Then what I want to put inside of this container div first is I want to put the logo for the project. Now I'm going to make that logo into a thing that you can click on and navigate. So let's put here a link, and I'm going to import that from next link. And inside of here, I want to put an image. Now we're using the built-in image component from next image, so we get the most performance out of it. And I want to put a source to it. And now I want you guys to go to the source code, and if you want to use the same logo as I am for this video, feel free to do so. It is going to be inside of the public folder for the project. Now in my case, I just edited it over here, just put it as logo.png inside of the public folder, and I can just come over here and just import the logo.png. Then I'm going to put an alt to it. We're going to call it logo. I'm also going to put a width to it of 50 and a height of 50. And we should see now that that logo, actually, it's kind of bugging because we don't have an href to this link. So we're going to actually put an href, which is just going to be the index route, so that when you click on it, you go to the home page, and we can see that the logo appears in the navbar now. Perfect. Now let's put a span right next to it, which will give us the ability to add an actual title to the website. So I'm just going to call it Travel Planner, but you can call it whatever you want. Obviously give it a less generic name. Now I'm going to put here a class name, and it's going to just set the size of this text to 2XL. I'm going to bold the text as well, and I'm going to set the color of it to be gray 800. So if you go here, we should see it should look similar to this. Now let's go back here to actually put that title to the side of the image. We're going to come to this link, we're going to give it a class name, and we're going to make it flex, and we're also going to center the items. And now if we go here, we should see that it's actually next to it. Perfect. Now below this, I want to add the different links that we're going to have in this project. So I'm going to add here a div, which is going to have a class name of flex items center and a space in the x direction of 4. Now in here, we're going to actually put the different links. That's why we put the space on the x direction to be 4, so we space them out a little bit. Now let's make it into a link that we're going to first link to the trips page. So we're going to say my trips. Then we want to link to the globe page. And that's all assuming that you watched the demo of this video. In the beginning of the video, I showed you guys the different pages we're going to have. But we're going to have a page where you can see all of your trips that you planned, and also a page where you can see a globe that pins every country you've ever visited. Then to actually make those links work, I'm going to put an href to them. First, the trips one is going to take me to the trips page, which obviously we haven't created yet, but we will later on. And then the globe one, we're going to be redirected to the globe page. Now for each of these links, we're going to put a class name here, and we're going to pass the color as text slate 900. We're going to also have a hover to it, which is going to make it into a text sky 500. Now I'm going to copy this class name, and I'm going to put it over here. And what we should see is that now if I hover them, we get the different colors, and we have the links appearing on the top right. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to add the button to sign in. So I'm going to put right below this, the button, and the button, technically, you can make it however you want. I'm just going to make it sign in, and then I'm going to put an SVG for the GitHub logo, because we're going to allow the user to authenticate using their GitHub account. So to do that, I'm going to just copy and paste this SVG over here. You can just copy and paste it as well. You'll see that if I go over here, it has the GitHub logo. To make them appear next to each other, which technically is what I want, I'm going to come here and I'm going to give a class name to this button. I'm going to set it to flex items center, justify center. Then if we go here, we should see they're now next to each other. I want to BG gray 800 and also add a hover effect to make it BG gray 900. And we should see that now it gets a bit dark. So we want to put a color to the text inside of here. So I'm going to say text white. We go here. Now we can see it. And I'm going to put some padding of 2, and we can actually see more space in the button. Then I'm going to make it rounded small, I believe. Yeah, that's pretty good. And then finally, for this SVG, I'm actually going to make it have a margin left of 2 pixels, so there's a bit more space. Perfect. Now when you click on this button, you should be able to sign in with your GitHub account. I will also just put here a cursor pointer just for us to be able to actually see the pointer when we hover this, and now we can be done with this. Now it's time for us to start setting up the authentication system for our project. But to do that, we actually need to have a database for our project. And in order to have a database for our project, we're going to be using NeonDB, which is a cloud-native Postgres solution that offers us scalable Postgres databases for us to use in our projects. And it's really easy to use it as well. I've been using them for a while now. So what I want you guys to do is for you guys to go to neon.com and create an account in it. Now you can also just click the link in the description and you can just connect your GitHub account to it. You should be fine. And you should find yourself in the console.neon.tech dashboard. Now in here, we can start a new Neon project. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on new project. I'm going to give it a project name. Since we're making a travel planner, I'll call it Travel Planner App. You can choose the Postgres version that you want, which is pretty cool. And also you can give the database a name. I'm going to call it Travel Planner. Now you can also choose the cloud service provider. I personally will choose AWS. And you can choose the region in which your database will be hosted at. Now, the thing is, you should choose the region that is the closest to where the majority of your users are going to be at, so that they actually have the best performance, even though I believe you get a great performance anywhere in the world. So I'm going to choose Oregon just because it's closest to where I am, and I'm going to click on Create. Now, we have successfully created our database. All we have to do now is we need to connect our database. So I'm going to click here on Connect Database, and we're going to have the URL for our Postgres database. Now, what I need is I need to actually go back to our project over here, and we have Prisma installed into it because I installed it down here, as you remember. And in order to create our Prisma project, I want to run npx prisma init. What this will do is it will generate the ecosystem for Prisma inside of our project. As you can see, when it's done generating, we should now see some changes in our project. The first big change is we have this Prisma folder over here. Inside of it, it comes with a schema.prisma. Now, this is a .prisma file, so if you don't have the Prisma extension installed in your project, you might not see syntax highlighting, but I highly recommend you just installing Prisma. I believe it's this one over here. So we have this schema.prisma, and what exactly is this? Well, this is where we're going to generate our database tables. We could also manually generate them over here by going to tables and creating our tables directly over here. But in order to maintain type safety and coherence in between our tables in our project and our tables here in Neon, we're going to be using the schema.prisma to generate our tables. But the thing with Neon is that it's super simple to connect. We just have to go to that connection string that we have over here, and we want to put it in our .env file over here. Now, this file was auto-generated for us through the Prisma init. We'll just copy and paste the link over here, and now we have successfully connected our database that is being hosted for us by Neon into our project. Now that we have successfully connected our database, I'm going to come down here and we can start setting up our auth. So in order to do that, we have next-auth, if you guys remember. And with next-auth, we have to create an auth.ts file at the root of our project. So we'll create here auth.ts. It has to be at the root of the project. And in here, we want to export const, set this equal to next-auth, and we want to import next-auth. So we'll say import next-auth from the next-auth library. Now, in this function over here, we have to pass in two things inside of it. The first thing is we need to pass in which providers are we going to have for our authentication in our project. So what do I mean by that is you can actually allow the user to authenticate into your project, sign into their accounts in a variety of different ways using next-auth. Now, the one we're going to be using is GitHub. We're just going to be using GitHub, so we can mainly just focus on that and make it super easy for any user to just log into an account. So I'm going to be using the GitHub provider, and to access that, I can just import GitHub from the next-auth /providers/GitHub. Now, the second thing I need to pass to the next-auth object is an adapter. Now, an adapter is only necessary if you are using something like Prisma, like an ARM that is going to automatically adapt and store the authenticated user information into our database. So Prisma actually will allow us to easily handle all of the user information storing by using this Prisma adapter that we can import. So I'll say Prisma adapter, and we can import this from the Prisma adapter package from auth Prisma adapter. And in here, all we have to do now is just pass our Prisma instance. Now, we haven't created a Prisma instance right now. So to do that, I'm going to be creating here a folder in our project. Let's call it the lib folder. And inside of it, I want to create a file called prisma.ts. Now, in this file, what we want to do is we want to basically generate an instance of the Prisma client. For those who are not familiar with Prisma, I just released a in-depth Prisma course. You can go ahead and watch it if you're interested. But basically what this Prisma client is going to do is it's going to create type safety for our different tables and models in our project. So in order to do this, we need to import Prisma client from Prisma client. Then, because we're using TypeScript in this project, you actually have to do a bunch of type manipulation, which is provided by the Prisma library for us. So what I recommend you to do is just go ahead and copy directly from the documentation. I already have it copied over here, so you can just copy it from me as well. And this is all just so that we have perfect type definitions for the Prisma client. And in the end, we should have this Prisma variable over here that we can use to access and execute different stuff in our database throughout our project. Now, specifically, the reason why we just created this is because now we can import this Prisma variable from @/lib/Prisma, and we can pass that into the Prisma adapter. Perfect. Now we have set up our auth file with next-auth. What we can do now is we can get back a couple things from this next-auth function. The first thing we can get is this auth function over here, which whenever we call it, it's going to return us back information about the session of the user who's currently signed in. So it's something super useful for us because we'll be able to know if the user signed in or not by just calling this function, which was provided by us through this other function. Then we need the handlers. This is just for us to handle redirecting when the user actually authenticates. Then we want a sign in and a sign out functions, which by the name you might assume, they're going to be used for us to allow users to sign in or sign out from their accounts. And this is pretty much it. Now, in order to actually make it work, I need to come here to our app folder, and I need to create another folder called the API folder. Now, obviously, if you're not familiar with Next.js, the API folder allows us to create API endpoints. But more specifically, if you're working with next-auth in a Next.js project, to make the authentication flow work, you need to create this folder inside of the API called auth. And then inside of it, you need to make another folder, which is going to have a square brackets, 3 dots, and next-auth. Now, inside of that folder, you need to create a route.ts. And in this route.ts, we're going to import the handlers that we just exported from the @auth. And we're going to export a constant. It's going to provide to us a get and a post request from these handlers. Now, again, we just need this to be here. You don't have to worry about it. This is just in order for next-auth to work. So we can close this up. And now we have successfully set up the infrastructure for authentication to work in our project. Now, the only thing we need to do left is we need to actually allow the user to click on the sign in button and log into their account. And to do that, I'm going to create here in our lib folder a file called auth actions. And in this file, I will create the 2 functions that will be called when the user logs in and when the user logs out. Now, I already have that sign in and sign out functions, but I want to keep the logic for them abstracted inside of here. So I will actually export a const called login. This is just going to be the login function. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the logout. Now, in these functions, I want to make both of them asynchronous. And in here, I want to call and import the sign in and the sign out functions that we just got from the auth file that we created. Now, inside of each of these functions, we're going to await and then call the respective function, like the sign in and the sign out. Now, for the sign in, we only have one way to sign in, which is through GitHub. So we can put that we want to sign in through GitHub, and we can also specify a redirect URL. Now, what is this redirect URL? Well, is basically where is the user going to be redirected to after the sign in with GitHub is finalized. So to do that, I'm just going to actually put here the homepage. So they will be redirected to the homepage whenever that's done so that they can continue using the app. Now for the logout, I'm going to copy this and we'll just basically, the logout is actually a bit easier than the login. We don't need to pass a provider and we just call the sign out function. Now we have these two functions that we can call anywhere in our app. The place we want to call it is in this sign in button over here. So at the end of the button, I'm going to add an on click and I'm going to call the login function so that when the user clicks on it, we can actually log in. Now, in order to have an on click, meaning an event that is being handled in our project, we need to have this component become a client component. So to do that, I'm going to come up here at the top and I'm going to turn this into a client component by using the use client keyword. Now you might be thinking, we're pretty much done, right? We can just click on the button and the user will be able to log in. Well, not really, because if you think about it, when we set up our authentication with the Prisma adapter, I specifically told you guys that when the user authenticates, we want to we want to save the information about the user who authenticated into our Neon tables. So in order to do that, I need to actually define the models that are going to represent a user, meaning define the structure of the tables that are going to exist in the Neon database. So in order to do that, the next-auth library actually provides us with the models that we need for when we are using Prisma with their service. So I'm actually going to copy and paste here the different model definitions that are provided for us for a user's account. Perfect. So this is it. These are the three models that we pasted. If you want, I'll put, obviously they'll be in the description together with the code. But basically, they're just the way in which next-auth stores information about the user who is signing into your account. So with this, we're actually going to have a table called user. We're going to have a table called account. We're going to have a table called session, one called verification token. Each of them are going to have their own purpose. Many of them are just for storing information about the user's sessions and just generic information about the user's account, like their email, their name, their profile picture. For example, because we're logging in with GitHub, next-auth will have access to the user's profile picture, so you can store the information on this image field. And information is like when the account of the user was created and so on. So again, you don't have to really understand all of this in the sense that obviously every model we're going to create for this project, I'm going to go in depth on, but these ones are just models that are provided for us. I didn't make this up. So they're all provided for us by next-auth so that we actually store information on our table about the users who authenticate to our project. So now what we want to do is we want to migrate the models that we have here in our schema so that we actually have access to them as tables on Neon. Now, you might be wondering, so now we just have to go to the tables here and create an individual table for each of those? Well, no, because it's super easy for us to do this. We just have to run the command npx prisma migrate and then say that this is all in the dev environment. When we run this, we will generate automatically the tables through the models that were created in this schema. We need to just give a name for this. I'm just going to give it init, meaning that this was the initial migration of our tables. You see that our database is now in sync with our schema, which means that if I go now to our Neon console over here and I refresh this, we should see the four different tables being created plus a Prisma migrations table, which just keeps tracks of all the different changes we've made to our database. So you see, each of them are different tables with different columns, just like we defined on our models over here. Perfect. So why was that necessary? Well, so that when the user comes here and clicks on that button, it's giving us an error just because we have one more command we need to run. But when the user clicks on the sign in button, we want to actually store that information. So now let's address this issue over here. The issue is just that we just migrated the table, meaning we generated the tables based on the models here in our schema, but the Prisma client, which is the library that we're going to be using in our project to actually make changes to the table, it's not up to date with it. So we need to generate the client. So to do that, I'm going to run npx prisma generate. And you'll see that what this will do is it is going to generate the client version of our Prisma models, so that if I were to use this variable, we actually have type definitions for the different models that we have on this file. Perfect. Now let's go back here and let me refresh this. Now the error still is here because one thing we actually need to do is when we run the npx prisma generate, it actually generates the client to this folder called generated that now exists inside of our project. We don't have to do anything to it. Now, what that means is that when I import our Prisma client, we don't import it from the Prisma client library, but rather we import it from this generated folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say import at /app/generated/prisma/client. And now if I go back here, we should see that it's now back to working. Okay, so let's try clicking this button. I already know it's not going to work because of one final thing we have to do. But yeah, it didn't work. And what is that issue? Well, the issue is that we have to actually set up our GitHub account to have a API key that we can connect to our project. Since we're using GitHub as a provider, we need to create an OAuth API key inside of our GitHub account. So I need you guys to sign into your GitHub account so that you guys can generate that. So I personally here just signed up to mine. The way you do this is you go to settings on your account, then you go down to developer settings, then you go to OAuth apps, and then you click on new OAuth app. I already have my keys, so I'm not going to create a new one, but you just create a new one. And when you're done doing that, you should have access now to a GitHub ID and a GitHub secret, which we're going to insert whenever you get that instead of the .env.local file. Now in this file, I want to create those two variables. So I'm going to create here the auth GitHub ID. And we're going to make the auth GitHub secret. And you just paste them right here, which in my case was this one's, but you shouldn't reuse it because I'm going to delete this instance when I'm done with this video. Now, the next thing you guys need to do is you need to generate an auth secret. This is just something internal that the next-auth library needs. So to do that, you need to open up your terminal and you literally just run npm exec auth secret, and that's going to automatically insert the auth secret to your .env.local so that you actually have access to it. So now we're going to close that up and we should be able to sign in to our account. So I'm going to click on this button and now we should be able to just click sign in. But we don't. We actually get the same error as before. And let me just take a look at this error. It's it's an error with our not our auth file. It's with our auth actions. We just have to add a use server at the top of this file. And now, when I click on this, we should be able to sign in. You see, we're getting redirected. Now, we are redirected back to the home page, so you might think that nothing happened, but I know for a fact that something happened. The reason why we didn't actually get prompted with the GitHub account is because, look, I'm already here signed into GitHub, so it does it automatically. And the reason why we didn't see ourselves leaving this page is because we got redirected back to the home page, which is the page we were already in. So it might look a bit confusing, but I can guarantee to you guys that we signed up. There's two ways we can check this out. The first one is we can go to our Neon console over here and refresh this page, and we should now see all of the data about the user who just signed up appearing over here. So as you can see, we have here information about the user that was all generated based on the user authenticating and stored inside of our project. So that's one way we know. We know that the user has a session, the user has an account, and the user has a user, right? But the other way is, for example, on our Navbar over here, one thing I want to do immediately is I want to remove this sign in button when the user is authenticated and replace it with a sign out button. And the same thing happen when the user is not authenticated. I actually want to remove the My Trips and the Globe page when the user is not authenticated, just because those are pages that the user should not access unless they have an account. So to do that, we're going to come back over here and we're going to go to our layout. And what happens is we want to use that auth file or that auth function that we got from next-auth, because that, as you remember, I explained, it returns whether or not the user is authenticated or not. So an example of doing that is if you are inside of a server component, such as the root layout, that is by default a server component. If you make that that component definition to an async function, you can now get the session by setting it equal to await auth. And if this session is null, it means that the user is not authenticated, and if it's not null, it means the user is, and also it will give you information about the user who's signed in. So I also want to import here the auth function. And the reason why I'm doing this on the layout component and not on the Navbar component is because the Navbar component is a client component. So we need to access the session through an await, as you can see over here. So to do that, I need to be in a server component. Now, what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to pass this session as a prop to our Navbar. Now, in the Navbar over here, I'll get the session by saying session and then defining the type of it to be a type of session or null. Now this session type over here, I didn't make this. We can automatically import this from next-auth. And now we have this perfect variable over here that tells us true or false whether or not the user is authenticated or not. So what I can do now is on the sign in button, for example, I can wrap this button around with a check that if the session is true, then I don't want to show this button. So I only want to show this button if there's no session. And you'll see that if I save the layout over here and I go back to the home page, we now don't see that button anymore. Now, instead of that, we want to put a logout button. So what I'm going to do is I actually want to remove this logic that I just added, and I want to make this into a much bigger thing. Before this link over here, I want to actually check to see if the session exists. Because if the session exists, then I will display all of the links that we have over here, plus the logout button. But if it doesn't exist, then I'll display the sign in button that we already have here. Now to do that, just one thing I need to do. Since these are both siblings, I need to actually wrap this around with an empty fragment, and it will auto align for us. Perfect. Now let's add the sign out button over here. So I'm actually going to copy this button, which is the sign in with all of its UI and stuff. And I'm just going to paste it here. I'm just going to remove the SVG because it doesn't make sense to have that SVG here. So I'll remove it and I'll change this to say sign out. Then on this on click, I want to call the logout function instead. And that should auto import at the top. Now, if we go back here, we should see the sign out button. And when I click on it, we should see that now those links disappear and this button becomes a sign in, meaning that we are successfully allowing the user to authenticate to their accounts whenever they click these buttons. So let's sign in again and let's start building the project now that we have the main core infrastructure built. Now let's start with building the My Trips page. So right now, this page leads to nowhere. So what we have to do is we have to create in our code over here a folder inside of our app folder called the trips folder. This will enable the /trips route to exist. Now inside of this trips folder, I'm going to create a file called page.tsx. And in here, we're going to export default async function, and we're going to call it trips page. Now, the first thing I need to do in this page is this page is only accessible if the user is signed in or not. Since this is a server component, hence why I made this an async component, I can easily get that information without needing to pass this session through props like we did for the navbar. So I'll just say await auth, and we'll get back the session. And then if there's no session, then I'll just return div that will say something like, please sign in. Now I can give some minor styles to this. I'm just gonna say that this has a display flex. It will justify center. It will items center. It will have the height of the screen. The text color will be gray 700, and the size of the text will be XL. Now, we have asserted that it's actually, the session is valid, because if not, it would have returned over here. So everything we do after this will now assume that the user is signed in. So we'll start by returning a div, which will give a class name of space y6 and a container margin in the x direction of auto, a padding in the x direction of 4, and a padding in the y direction of 8. Then inside of this, we want to start with the header of the trips page. This will include, for example, just a title to this page, which will say that this is the dashboard where you can see all your trips, but also it'll include a button where you can click on and it will allow you to create a new trip. So we're going to put here an h1 tag that will say dashboard. And then, like I said, we're going to put down here link. Actually, let's put a button. And in this button, we're going to put the text new trip. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't use the like a lowercase button because this is actually a component we're gonna be reusing on this project. So there's 3 components we're gonna wanna import from the Redux UI library. So what I want you guys to do is, if you guys want to access these components, you can go to the code in the description and you can just copy the files and just paste them over here. We're gonna put them inside of this UI component, and inside of it, I want to paste these 3 files. Like I said, they are pre-built components that we now have access to because of Redux UI, and it will allow us to reuse the same button multiple times in the project with the same style and the same functionality. And the other 2 are components that we're going to use later on in this video, so I wouldn't worry that much about them. But the one thing that we need to do is we have to create this cn variable over here, which we're actually going to use in other parts of our project as well. If you don't know, it's commonly used by the library Tailwind merge, which just allows you to write Tailwind classes in multiple lines so that it's not just a huge line. Like if you put a lot of classes here, it might get a bit big. So you use this function so that you can actually make it into multiple lines. And what we have to do is we have to go to this lib folder. We'll create a utils.ts file, and we'll just paste this code over here. Since we already have both the CLSX and the Tailwind merge libraries installed, this will work. And now those components that we pasted over here now all work perfectly. I just have to update this so that it knows that there's something there, and we should be good to go. Perfect. So now we have access to that button. That was the whole point of that. So we can import this button component from the components UI button, and you'll see that when I save this, now if you go back here, it should be working. Why is it saying not defined? We just imported it. Oh, I didn't save the file. Yeah. So you see that the button now has a specific styling to it. So when I click this button, I actually want to implement a functionality to it, which is I want to navigate to a page which we're going to create later on, which is going to allow the user to actually add a new trip. But the problem with this is that since this is a server component, we can't have an on-click functionality that exists inside of here. But what we can have though is we can have a link that redirects us to that page. So I'm actually going to wrap this around with a next link. that when you click on it, it's going to take you to the routes that we're going to create, which is going to be the trips/new route. And you see that now when I click on this, it takes us there. Now, before I make the dashboard page, which is this page over here, I think it's actually important that we do make the new trip page, just because in order to see the trips on your dashboard, you need to have a trip, right? So we're going to do that first. We're going to come over here to our folder, and we're going to make another folder in here. Let's call it new. And I'm going to create another page.tsx in here. Then on this component, it's actually going to be a form component, in the sense that we're going to have a whole form where the user can write the information about their trip and upload an image for their trip and so on. So all of that functionality is a client functionality. So we do want to make this into a client component. Then I want to export default function, and I'll give it the name of this component as new trip. We'll return down here a div, which we're going to give a class name of max width LG, and then margin X as auto, and then we'll put a margin at the top to be 10. Now inside of here, we want to use the card component that I automatically pulled from that UI folder. And we're gonna basically build our whole page using the card components. So we'll start with this card component over here. We're then going to wrap the whole thing around with it, and we're gonna define a card header. So I'll say card header. This will include a new trip title. We can see now that if I go to here, this is what I see. It's just a card with like a beautiful UI to it, and the title says new trip. Then what we can do is I can set a card content. And on this card content, I want to define a form. Now on this form, I'll just pass a class name to it, which will just put some space in the y direction between the elements in this form, which are just going to be inputs. Then we're going to put a div over here that defines the first input that we want to have. It's going to be an input of type text, and it's going to have a name of title. It's just the title of the trip. So like, what if I'm going to Japan, I can call this the Japan trip or something like that, right? Then I want to apply a bunch of class names to this. And since it's going to be a lot of class names, I can actually use the cn function that we just created to make them into multiple lines. And the first class that I want to put is I want to make the width of this input be the full length of the card. Then I want to set a border to it, which was going to have a border gray of 300 as a color. Then a padding on the X direction of 3, and a padding on the Y direction of 2. Then we'll make this second part of the styles to have a rounded, like a bordered radius that is going to be a medium border radius. Also, when you focus on it, we're going to put an outline of none. I'm also going to use one of our pre-made classes, which is going to be the ring2 class. And I'm also going to just add a final one, which is going to make the ring be of a blue color of 500. Now I just need to close this input because I forgot to do that. And we should see the input being styled like this. When you focus on it, it has this little blue color around it. Now I want to put also a placeholder here, and I'll just say something like Japan trip as an example. And now it looks like a real input. We also want to put a label around this. So I'm going to put a label up here, and it's just going to say title. And I'm going to put a class name to it, which is going to be a display of block. The text will be small. The font will be medium. And that obviously refers to the boldness of it. And the color will be text gray 700. And we'll just space out from the input a bit with a margin bottom of 1. Perfect. Now we can copy this whole div actually, and we're gonna paste it a couple times. So I'll paste it twice. The first time we're gonna actually make this be the description of the trip. That's something that we need from the user, and we won't use an input for this. We're gonna use a text area, and actually
both for the text area and for the above one, for the title and for the description, I want to make all the inputs required. So I'll just add this required thing. I'll remove the type text on the text area because it's obviously a text area. And then I want to change the name of this to be description, and the placeholder, you just make it like trip description. Now on this next one over here, which is going to be the start date. So we want to actually define the start date of the trip and the end date of the trip. So for that, we actually need to wrap this around with another div because it's going to be two of them. And we're going to copy the start date one and we're going to paste it again and make another version of it, which is going to be the end date. Now on the start date and the end date, it's an input of type date so that the user can select the date specifically. The name of the start date one is going to be start date, and the other one is going to be end date. So we'll change this to end date. There's not going to be any placeholders for them, so I'm just going to delete this. And you can see that now this is how it looks like. And it looks fine, but the thing is, I do want to make the start and the end date appear right next to each other. So to do that, what I need to do is I need to come to this parent div above both of them. And I need to give a class name here, which is going to be a grid. And I'm going to just set the grid columns to be 2 of them. And I'll put a gap in between them of 4. And now they'll be right next to each other in 2 different columns. Perfect. Now we'll add the button to submit this form. Now, obviously, we're also allowing the user to add an image, to upload an image for a trip. But before we get to that whole process, which is a little bit long, I want to actually just get us to a state where we can actually submit this information to our database so we know that that works before we actually start uploading images to our table. So what I want to do here is above this form over here, I'm going to add a button. So I'll add that button component that we created. And this button will say create trip. And the type of this button is going to be of type submit. And the class name I want to put is I want it to be the full length in the full width of the form. So now we have this. Perfect. And when I click on this button, I want to send this information to our database. But where in our database? Because we have no table specifying where to keep information about the trips we are creating. So that's what we need to do. We have to create a model in our Prisma schema that is going to represent what a trip looks like. So to do that, we're going to come down here at the bottom and I'm going to create a new model. So if you're not familiar with Prisma, models are basically tables. So each model you create is going to be a table in your database. So if I want to make a table called trip, I'm going to create a model called trip. Now, inside of this model, we define the attributes to it. So the columns of this table. The most basic column that we might want to have is an ID, right? Which is of type string. And because I want to generate an ID for it, I actually need to specify that it's an ID. And I can pass a default value to it, which is going to be just an auto-generated UID. Now, the second thing I need is a title, right? We created the form. It requires a title, which is a string. Also a description, which is going to be a string as well. And remember, we're going to allow the user to upload images. We don't have that yet, but because I'm making the table, I want to actually make this table already have the functionality to allow us to upload an image. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep track of a URL of an image that the user uploaded for this trip. So I'm going to make a field called image URL. But also the user doesn't have to upload an image for a trip. So I want to make it into a string, but I want to make it optional. Now the next thing is I need a start date for the trip, which is going to be actually of type datetime. We also need an end date, which again is going to be date time. And finally, we need to keep track of information about a user who created this trip. So what I need to do is we have this user model over here. It's the user that exists in our project. So I want to make a relation in between this model and the user model. So to do that, I'm going to actually set a user as a type, with a type user, and I want to establish a relation in between this model with the user model. And the relation is going to be established using two different fields that connects both models. The first field is going to be a user ID that we're going to keep track in this table. Whenever we create a trip, we're going to pass a user ID to that trip of the user who's creating that trip. So now we can establish a connection in between the trip model with the user model by connecting the user ID that we pass when we create a trip and the ID that exists in the user table. So if you come here to the user table, they have an ID here. We just connect both of them, and then that's a relationship established. Now it's given us an error because when we define a relationship like this, we are obligated to come to the other side of the relationship, like the user here, and establish the other end of the relationship here as well. So the same way how a trip needs a user can have a bunch of trips, right? Because they can create a trip, so they can create multiple trips. So I'm going to create this field on a user called trips, and I'm going to set it of type array of trip. And now that error should go away. Now the last thing I want to add to a user is I want to add the information, or to the trip, sorry. I want to add the information of when this trip was created and when it was updated. So I'm going to do this thing where we did with all of the other models, which is add a created at and an updated at field. It's very easy. You just set it to date time. It will default to now. And then whenever you update, it will automatically update these values. You never have to pass the values for this. It's just for us to keep track of it. Now we have successfully created the model for our trip table. So how do we actually create a table out of it? So to do that, you guys know already what to do. We come here to our terminal. We're going to run npx prisma migrate, then dev, and then when we wait a bit, it's going to ask us for the name of the migration. I'm just going to call it trip or something like that. So we'll just call it trip. And then it's actually going to execute the migration. So we'll come back here. We'll go to our Neon console. And just like that, when I refresh this, we have this column or this table in our Neon database. So it has all the fields that we created and we can start adding data to it. So now that we have our table set up, we're going to come back to our code and we want to generate the so we have migrated the changes to our model, but now we want to generate those changes into our Prisma client. So I'm going to run npx prisma generate. Now we'll have access to it. And what that means is that now, whenever we want to write any database executions, any database queries or anything of that sort, we can actually have direct access to the updated trip model. So what we want to do is we want to create what is known as a server action that is going to be executed when we submit this form. So to do that, I'm going to come here to our code and I want to go to the lib folder and I'm going to create a folder called actions. Now inside of here, I'm going to create a file that is going to represent the create trip server action. Let's call it create trip. And in here, we're going to export an async function called create trip. So whenever we need to actually create the trip through the form, we're going to call this function. Now this function is going to take in the form data from the form. So we're going to call this directly from the onSubmit of that form. Now, when we get that form data, we're going to have access to information about the trip, such as the title, which we can get it by saying title equals to form data.get, and then directly target the name of the field of the input. So we're going to put here title because that was the name that we passed. And then we can transform this into a string. Now we'll do the exact same thing for all of the other fields, and I'll be back in a second so that this doesn't get repetitive. Perfect. As you can see, we got the title, the description, the start date, and the end date. Now we can actually check to see if any of those fields are empty. So the way we do this is if the title is empty, or the description is empty, or the start date is empty, or what is the last one? It's going to be, or the end date is empty. If that's the case, we're just going to throw an error
that is going to say missing fields or something like that, or all fields are required. That might be better. All fields are required. So this is how we handle that. Now we also want to guarantee that when you're creating this this trip, you are authenticated. Now by default, you shouldn't even get to this new trip page if you're not authenticated. However, we also want to double check just before we execute this function. So I'm going to get the session of the user by, again, using the auth function that we have. And if there isn't a session, then I'm going to throw a new error saying that the user is not authenticated. Now below this, what we want to do is we want to convert the start dates and the end dates into actual date JavaScript date objects. Because if you remember from our table, both the start date and the end date are timestamps, not strings. So we want to convert them just real quick. I'm going to create a variable called start date, set it equal to a new date, and we'll convert the start date string, which is the string version of it. Then we'll do the exact same thing, but for the end date. And we'll change this as well. Now we're pretty much set to use this data to upload to our table. So how do we do that? Well, we use Prisma or the Prisma client that we have in order to create that trip by calling the Prisma that we import from the Prisma file. And then because we ran the generate function, you see we have direct type safety access to the trip model. And we can call the create function inside of that model, which will allow us to add items to that table. Now inside of here, we have to pass the data that we're trying to create. Now again, it's going to require the title, it's going to require the description, and it's also going to require us to pass the start date, the end date, and also one thing that we need, as you can see over here, is we need the user URL, or the user ID. So I'm going to pass here user ID. And to get that, I'm just going to say session.user.id. Now it's giving us an error because possibly user is nil here. However, one thing we can do is we can just check here to see if not session or not session.user. Then we return that. And then all of a sudden, I can now access the ID. Actually, I might also have to do .id here. Yeah, perfect. And now we can assert that this is valid when we create the trip. Now, what happens when you create the trip? Well, I want to navigate the user to the trips page. So I'm going to use the redirect function, not from next-dist server API utils. That's not the one. Usually that causes a bug. You get the one from next navigation. And in here, you're going to run the /trips route. And that's just going to redirect the user to that page. Perfect. Now, let's use this create trip action and call it in our new trip component. So the way I'm going to call it is, instead of this form over here, I'm going to basically pass an action to it. And inside of it, we're going to have access to the form data, which is going to be of form data type. And I'm just going to make this inline for simplicity reasons, but we can just call here the create trip function and pass the form data. Now, because of the version that I'm using, also we have to import this function. But yeah, because I'm using React 19 and I'm using server actions, and this is an asynchronous call that I want to handle the pending state, I might want to also use a transition for this. So I'm going to use here the use transition hook from React. It's going to give us an is pending for the pending state and also a start transition function. And what this will do is when I wrap this create trip asynchronous execution here with this start transition, it is going to handle, turn this is pending to true. So it's basically a Boolean that will keep track of when this transition started and when it finished. So that will just really easily give us this pending state without having to deal with multiple states keeping track of this. So we'll just wrap this create trip with the start transition. And now we have this is pending, which I'll just put it over here on the button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this disabled whenever it is pending, because if you try to create a trip, I don't want to allow the user to keep clicking the button, but also I want to change this text whenever it's pending to say something like this, creating, or something like that. And if it's not pending, then it will become the default, which is create trip. Perfect. So now let's test to see if this is working. I'm going to come over here. Let's try to add a new trip. I'm just going to use the example that we have here, Japan trip. Let's call it a trip to Tokyo and Kyoto or something like that. And then let's say that it's between the 18th and the 26th. Now I'm going to open the network tab just for us to keep track of if there's any errors, just in case. I'm going to click create trip. And yes, it seems like there was an error. Let's check what it was. Uncaught promise headers. So it's on the create trip file, and we've dealt with this error already. We already know what it is. We have to come to the create trip file, and we need to turn this into a use server because it's a server action. Now let's try again. I'm going to fill this in and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I just created here the fake data, and let's click on create trip. And if everything is working, we should be redirected to the trips page. So it seems like it worked. The only way for us to know is for us to go to the Neon console, refresh this page, and we should see the data that we just added, and that's exactly what we do. Perfect. So now we created our first trip. But the problem is that we don't have the image URL yet. So we didn't allow the user to upload an image. So that's the thing we're going to do next. So in order for you to handle image uploads, I want you guys to go to uploadthing.com. It's completely free, especially for what we're using. So in order to handle the uploading of images, I want you guys to go to uploadthing.com and create an account. It is completely free for the purposes of this video. So you guys can check here the pricing. But we already have an account, so I'm just going to sign into my account and I'll be back in a second. So when you sign up to your account, you're going to be at the backlog over here of your team. You're going to click on create a new app and you're going to choose your version. So I'm going to choose the free version, right? You can choose the other versions if you want to. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it Travel Planner. And I'm going to choose nothing else. The region is fine. The access controls as public is fine. And I'm going to click on create app. Now we have successfully created the app. I'm going to go to the API keys here at the left, and I'm going to copy the token that they provide for us. So I'm going to click on copy, as you can see over here, and I'm going to go back to our project. I'm going to go to the .env.local, and I'm just going to add that token at the end of our environment variables. Now, with that token, we have access to the project. Now, with that token, we have access to upload thing in our project. So what else do we have to do? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to create a folder in our API folder over here, and it's going to be called the upload thing folder. Now, this is going to become obviously a route in our API. And inside of here, I want to create both a route.ts and also a core.ts. Now, I'm following completely the documentation from UploadThing. If you want to check it out, you can go to docs.uploadthing.com. And in here, you can see that they provide to us this file that we have to put in our project, which is the core.ts. So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to paste it over here. Then I'm going to go down and I'm also going to copy the route.ts file that they provide for us. And I'm also going to paste it over here. And then they tell us to go to our lib folder and create a upload thing.ts file. And in here, I want to copy this file over here and just paste it there as well. Now you see it is apparently this path doesn't work. So it's because of the way that it's importing the file. So I need to change this to an @ and now the importing will work. Now the final thing that they suggest is for us to add upload thing styles. So we have here versions for Tailwind v3, Tailwind 4, or even just normal CSS if you have it. I'm going to import here the the Tailwind v4 version. And I'm going to come back to our project. I'm going to go to the globals.css, and I'm going to replace this with whatever they provide for us. Then what I want to do is we have successfully set up 99% of the things that we want for upload thing to work in our project. But on this core.ts over here, it has a lot of logic for the file router, and we want to change a couple things to more accurately match our project. So the first thing is it has this fake auth function so that we prevent non-authenticated users from uploading images, right? Which is something that we definitely want in our project. Now, we don't need this fake auth function because we do have our real auth function, which is actually a function from the next-auth library. So we're going to replace this with that one. So we have to import it, also delete this rec over here. And we now have access to the session. So what we can say is if there's no session or there's no session.user, then we throw this upload thing error, which says that the user is unauthorized. Now, if it is successful, then we can return any kind of data that we want to see it as accessible in the metadata. For example, an example that they give here is the user ID, which we might want to have by setting this equal to session.user.id. Now, there's other options as well, like handling what happens after the upload of a file. However, we really don't need this for the purposes of this project. So we can pretty much just close this file and handle the rest in our front-end component. So if you remember, they auto-generated for us in this upload thing file over here, two upload components, an upload button and an upload drop zone. Now, the button obviously is just a button that you can click and you can select to be able to upload a file. The drop zone allows us to literally drag and drop files, and it will be automatically uploaded to our upload thing project. So in this project specifically, we're just using the upload button. So we need that on our form over here. So we're going to start by going down here. We're going to go right below, right behind the button. It's going to be the second to last thing to appear in our form. And we're going to call the upload button. Now we want the one from, not from upload thing React. We want the one from @/lib/upload thing. Now with this button, it is going to be a self-closing component. And inside of it, we will need to put an endpoint. And we're going to call this endpoint image uploader. Then we want to run an on-client upload complete, which is a function that is going to run when the upload to upload thing is completed. So we're going to select an image, we're going to click upload, it's going to upload to upload thing, and when we get that, we're going to receive that image back as a URL to a publicly accessible image. And with that, we're going to store that image URL into our table. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a callback function that is going to first check to see if the response and the response at 0, because it's just one image, if it has a UFS URL, because if it does, then I want to set an image state that we're going to create equal to that URL, which is going to be the URL of where the image is going to be accessible at. So I'm going to come up here and we're going to create a new state, and we're going to call it the image URL and set image URL. Now this is going to be a use state. It is going to be of type string or possibly null, and it's going to start as null. Now when we get this UFS URL, we can now set the image URL equal to that value. So we'll say res0.ufs URL, and we successfully set that. Now we've handled what happened when the upload is complete. What if there's an error? So we're going to run here and call the prop on upload error. And if there's an error, we want to at least just console log it. So I'll just console.error, and I'm going to say there was an upload error, and I want to get that error back. Now, what we can do is we will receive this image URL because it's going to exist inside of this state. Now, one thing we can do is we can actually display that image as a preview before the user even creates the trip. Now, the way we can do this is surrounding this upload button, I'm actually going to make a section here. It's going to be the trip image section. I'm going to surround this whole thing with it. And we're going to add a label for this input, and it's going to be called trip image. Then I'm going to actually check to see if the image URL is null. Because if it's null, then we don't want to do anything. But if it's not null, then I want to display the image directly. So I'm going to import image from next image, and I'm going to set the source equal to the image URL. I also want to put here an alt, just say, I don't know, trip preview. And let's put some class names to it just so that it doesn't look super ugly. I'm going to make the width of it be full. I want to make the margin bottom be 4. I want to make the corners of it be rounded. And I'll set a max height of 48. And I'll set it to object cover. Now, what we can see is that when I go back here and I go to the new trip, and we see that this button now appears here. It is an auto-generated button, like I said. It even tells us the biggest file size that it accepts. And when I select here an image, so let me just choose a random image here, you'll see that when the image is finished uploading, it will actually show up above the button. Or not actually. Oh, I know what the issue is. So it says that there's an issue because it's missing the required width property. So what happens is we didn't put a width and a height, obviously, but the thing is we already set the width and a height through the class names. So instead of that, I'm just going to say fill. Now I still get an error. I get that we need to declare this host name as part of my next config. This happens under, this is an issue with NextJS, not an issue, it's just we need to authorize this domain in our next config. So the way to fix this is we go here to our next config, we set an images prop, we then set remote patterns, and this is going to be an array of objects. And the object that we want to add has the host name equal to this host name over here. Now, if we go back and we refresh it, now let's actually just get directly the URL for that image. You can see that we can actually access that image. That's the image I uploaded. So it is publicly available. And if we go to upload thing, you can see on the files that they appear over here. I actually uploaded it twice. But when I refresh it, our app actually broke. So let me unbreak it. And then let's close this. Let's actually set the image to be this no matter what. So let's just do this, just so we can test this. And yes, we can load the image perfectly. Now, obviously it looks massive, so we don't want that to happen. So the way we're gonna fix this is I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna remove this fill actually. Let's just set the width and the height directly. I'm gonna set the width to like 300, the height to like 100, and yeah, now it works perfectly. So let me remove this and let's make this into an image URL. And I'll make this into an image URL as well. Perfect. Now we know that when we upload an image, those images are successfully stored here. I'm just going to delete this ones because they weren't actually sent to the table. So I'm just deleting them. Now what we want to do is we want to add the ability to send those images when we create a trip. So the way we do that is, since we have here a create trip action, right? And we send the form data to it. So we need to add the image URL as a part of this form data object. So to do that, inside of this action, I'm going to say if an image URL was sent, because remember, it's optional, you don't have to, then I want to append to this form data a field called image URL with the image URL data. If that happens in this create trip, we can now get that image URL as part of the data. So we're going to call it image URL and we're going to say image URL. And then we can pass that as well as part of the trip that we are creating. I'm going to put it right after the description and we have to put a comma and we can test to see if this works now. We're going to come over here. We're going to again say Japan trip. We're going to put Tokyo trip. Actually, no, let's make a different one. Brazil trip. Let's say trip to see my family. Let's make it be later in the year. And then obviously way later. And then let me just choose a picture to put here. So I just uploaded here a random picture I had on my computer. It's actually of Iceland, so it doesn't even make sense with this trip. But let's see what happens. I upload the image. Perfect. As you can see, the image shows up over here. And now when I click create trip, it says creating, I get redirected back here. And if we check on the Neon console, we should see that now, yes, the second trip I created now has a URL to where that image exists. Perfect. We have successfully finished the part of our website where we create trips. Now let's start building the actual dashboard to show the different trips that we have. So the first thing I want to do is I want to clean up all of this tabs over here. Let's go just for the trips page that we started creating previously, but we never finished. And I first want to center just this UI. I want to put this to the right instead of to the left. So to do that, I'm going to add a class name here. We're going to make this a display facts items center. And I want to justify this between. Then on this H1, I want to just set the text to be 3XL, the font to be bold, and the tracking to be tight. And the rest should be fine. Now, below this div, what we want to do is we want to basically put the welcome card, which is going to say like, hey, welcome, and then the name of the user. And it will say like the amount of trips that you have planned and so on. So to do this, I'm going to actually use that card component that we have. And I'm going to add a card header, which will have a card title. Now in this card title, we'll say welcome back. And then we'll just put the user's username. So I'll say session.user.name. So we should see something like this. Welcome back, Pedro Machado. Then below this, we should add the card content. So I'm going to say card content. And I'm going to put a p tag, which is going to either display a message saying that we want to start planning our first trip if we have no trips planned yet, or actually just say the amount of trips that we have planned so far. So to have that information about how many trips the user has, we have to actually retrieve all the entries on the table of trips for this specific user. So to do that, I'm actually going to come to over here, and I'm going to say const trips. We're going to say this await prisma dot trip dot find many. So find many is just a function that will allow us to query many entries on a specific model or specific table. In this case is the trip table. And in here we can specify what trips are we looking for. So we're looking for many trips, but which ones specifically? Well, in the trips table, we only want to get the ones where the user ID field is equal to the user ID of the user that is currently logged in. So that we only get the trips of the user specifically logged in. We now have this trips array, which when we come down here, if the trips.length is equal to 0, then we can put a text that says, for example, something like start planning your first trip by clicking the button above. Now, if that's not true, meaning if there is a trip available, meaning that the user has already created trips, then what I want to show is I want to show a message that says, and I'll use backticks for this because I want to insert some JavaScript. I'm going to say you have, and then I'll insert the amount of trips prepared. So if we come here, we should see that it should say you have 2 because we haven't finished writing the actual full text, but it's correctly getting the amount of trips that the user has created. Now, what else do we want to put on this paragraph tag? Well, we also want to change depending on, first of all, we're going to say you have this amount of trips, right? But if it's one trip, then it doesn't have the S in the end of the word trips. But if it's multiple, then it's in plural. So first thing we have to do is we have to account for that. So how am I accounting for that? I'm just going to say here that if trips
dot length is equal to 1. Then I'm just putting the word trip. If it's not, then I'm using the word trips. Then the second thing is I want to say that this is the amount of trips planned. So now it actually forms a coherent sentence. But also, I want to know how many of those trips are upcoming, meaning that, for example, we might have 2 trips, and specifically the trips that we created are trips that are in the future. But since this is a travel planner, some of the trips might be trips that you created before and you have already been to. So we might want to create a distinction between the trips that you have been to, so the ones from the past, and the ones that are upcoming. So to do that, I'm going to come back here, and below the trips, we want to, first of all, we want to sort those trips. So I'm going to create an array called sorted trips. To do that, I'm going to sort them by date. So I want to make a copy of the trips array, and I want to call the sort function. I forgot to just put an equal sign over here. So I'm going to put the sort function. And with the sort function, we can put a callback function here that will specify what comparison are we making while sorting this. So we'll get 2 items, A and B. And what we want to do is we want to sort them based on the difference between the date, the start date of B and the start date of A. So that gives us an array that is sorted based on which trips have the start date more recent. So to do that, I'm going to first of all start with the start date for B. So I'm going to say new date b.start date. And I want to specifically get the time for it. And then, because they might be on the same day. And then I want to subtract that by the same thing, but for the A. And this should create a sorted trips array that is accurately sorted by the start date. Then below this, I want to use this to calculate the upcoming trips. First, to know which trips are upcoming, I need to know what day is today. So I'm going to say const today is equal to new date. This should just give me an empty value for today. Then I want to set the hours. So I'm going to say today.set hours to 0000, just to keep it as the beginning of the day. Then I want to create the array for the upcoming trips. So I'm going to say upcoming trips. And I'm going to filter through the sorted trips to only keep the trips that haven't happened yet. So I'm going to say sorted trips dot filter, and I want to filter for all the trips in which the new date of the trip dot start date is greater than or equal to the value of today, because then that means that this specific trip that we're filtering for will happen in the future. And now we can use this upcoming trip variable to specify here, for example, that the user has, so we'll say if upcoming trips.length is greater than 0, if that's true, then we want to say that the user has upcoming trips dot-length, and then we'll say upcoming. I know it sounds confusing. It's a bunch of string templating, but it's fine. You guys will understand. We're basically just manipulating this so that, I also have to put a dot here. And then for this, I have to put this, and I'll just put an empty string. So I know this sounds confusing, but basically we're just building this string over here. We have 2 trips to our plan. But if I were to create a trip here, I'll just put random information, and I were to make it be a trip of the past, right? So I'll make it May, and then I'll make it June 4th, and I'll just create this trip. You'll see that I have 3 trips planned, but only 2 of them are upcoming because I forcibly made one of them be something on the past. So that's literally what we've been building, just this information. And to make that string, it looks a bit complicated, but you get what I mean. It's just a bunch of checking for the lengths of the arrays. But yeah, perfect. So now we have that information. Now that we're done with that, we want to make a section to display the recent trips. So to do that, I'm going to come down here, and I want to make a div that is going to have an h2 tag that is going to say your recent trips. Now this h2 tag, I'm going to put a class name of text Excel. Then I'm going to make it a font semi-bold and a margin bottom of 4. Now I want to again check to see if the trips array is empty. So if trips.length is equal to 0, then I want to show a card that is going to have a card content, and that card content is going to say that there are no trips yet, and that the user can create their first trip. So start planning your adventure by creating your first trip. Now I want to also put an else case for this, so I'll just quickly just put something here for that error to go away, but actually that has to appear down here. That was a mistake, but yeah, so it appears down here. And inside of this, I want to also put a link, which again, it's going to be a button similar to what we did with the create button, and it's going to be the new trip. I'm going to actually just copy this. It's going to be another link to that page. So I'll just paste it here. And I'm going to change this to create trip. So what we should see is absolutely nothing because we have trips. So that's just the base case. Now, when we don't have trips, right, we want to also put some minor class names to this. So I'm going to put here a class name to the card content. It's going to be a display flex and a flex column. Items will be centered. And I'll justify the items to the center as well, with a padding on the y direction of 8. Then for the h3 tag, I'm going to put a class name of text Excel, font medium, and a margin bottom of 2. Now for the paragraph tag, I'll put a text center, a margin bottom of 4, and a max width of medium. Now we can start building the recent trips actual part of it, which is over here. Now inside of this, I want to actually put a div, which is going to serve as a grid, because we're going to display each trip as like a specific card. So in this div, I'm going to put a class name of grid, which on a small screen, it's going to have 2 columns. On a large screen, is going to have 3. So grid calls 3. And we're going to put a gap of 4 on each of the columns. Now on this div, I want to go through the sorted trips so that we make it in order of the most recent ones. So I'm going to say sorted trips dot slice, and I want to specifically only get like 6 of them, right? I don't want to get all of the trips. I want to get a small portion of them. I personally only have 2 trips. Actually, I have 3. We created 3, right? But this is just so you don't display all of the trips at once. Then I'm going to slice between 0 and 6, and I'm going to map through each of them. Now to map them, I'm going to get the trip, and for the trip, I want to display a link because I want you to be able to click on the whole card and navigate to an individual page for that trip. Now we haven't made that page yet, so I'm just going to put an empty href here, but we're going to do that in a second. Now on this map over here, we also have to get the key because we're looping through a list in React. So we'll have to pass this key to the link so that we don't get any warnings. Now on this link, I want to make a card, which will have a card header, and the card header will have a title, which is going to be the title of the trip. So we're just going to say trip.title. Now we're going to put some style to this. I'm just going to say that the height of this will be full. And when you hover it, I just want to apply some very minimalistic shadow. And I want to put a transition shadow to it as well. Now on the card title, I also want to specifically set the line clamp to be 1. Now when I go here, you see that all 3 trips now appear here. They have the hover effect, and we can show the title. Now let's add more of it. Let's put the description. So below the header, I want to put the card content. And we'll start with a paragraph tag that will serve as the description. So we're going to say trip.description. Now I'm going to add some class names to this just because it will look very ugly by default. So I'm going to set the text to be small, the line clamp to be 2, and our margin bottom to be 2. And it seems pretty fine. Now, I also realized that this shouldn't be too close to the left because we did apply a padding X on this, but I realized that the issue is that we never closed the card over here. This first card that we created should have been closed there and not over here. So yeah, that was a mistake. So we just have to delete that. And now we should see the correct UI. Now let's continue just adding more stuff to this card content. I'm going to add a div here, and now we'll just specify the dates in which this trip happened. So I'll start with the start date. I'm going to say new date, and then trip.startDate. And I'm going to specify that it is to locale date string. That's going to give us an accurate information. I'm going to close this, and I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to put a hyphen in between, and I'm going to put the end date. So it should just say the dates in which this happened. And it looks kind of big, so I'm actually going to put this and make it be a text small as well. Yeah, nice. Now we're pretty much done with each trip information. Now what we want to do is we want to allow the user to click on this and actually see a whole page with the image of the trip and everything else for the trip. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So in order to make that happen, what we want to do is we want to create a page that is going to exist in a route that is already present on the trips route, but it's an extension of it, which will exist under the ID of the trip. So each trip is stored with an ID, as you can see over here in the neon table. And we're going to put that ID as part of the route in order to navigate to the page where it just shows the information for that trip. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and we're going to create a new folder inside of the trips folder, which is going to serve as the route for the individual trip. So to make it accept the param for the trip ID, we're going to define that this route is an extension of the trips route, and it has a param called trip ID. Now inside of this folder, we're going to create a file called page.tsx. And inside of this file, we're going to create a function called, it's going to be an async function called trip detail. It's the page with the details about the trip. Now, in order to get the params from the arguments of this component, we need to pass a prop over here, and NextJS will automatically pass the prop for this. Now, the type for this is going to be params, and it's going to take in a promise, which is going to have an object with the trip ID, which is a string. Now, it's given us an error because we need to close this like this. And inside of this component, we can get the ID of the trip by saying const is equal to await params, and then we can get the trip ID. Now, why do we need the trip ID? Because in order to find the details for a specific trip, when we navigate to this page, for example, if I were to copy the ID for this trip, the Japan trip, and I were to do this, we should now see a page. Obviously, it's not displaying anything, but we want to fetch the information in the table. So query for the trip in the table where the ID matches with the trip ID of the route. So to do that, we're going to do this. We're going to say const trip is equal to await prisma.trip. So we're getting the trip back by querying the trip model and finding the first item in the model. So finding the first row in the table in where the ID of that trip is equal to the trip ID. Now, we also want to specify that we only want to get trips for the user signed in, right? So what I want to do is I also want to check for the session. So I'm going to say const session is equal to await auth. So we're going to check if the user is authenticated. And if there's no session, then I'm just going to return a div that is going to say, please sign in. Perfect. Now on this strip, we want to, now the session value is valid. So I want to check to see if the user ID is equal to the session.user.id. Now I need to obviously put a question mark here, and we get back this trip information. But possibly, imagine you, for example, go to a page where you put the wrong ID. Then this means that this trip won't be valid. If that's the case, so if not trip, then we also want to return a message saying trip not found. Something simple. So trip not found. But if all of those cases pass, we reach a point where we have all of the trip information. So we want to return some UI. However, I want to tell you guys something. This is a server component. And the reason why we made it specifically a server component, right? It's an async component, is because we wanted to get the params and also fetch data, query the database, all of that. However, this page is going to involve a lot of client-side work. And the reason for that is because we're going to have a bunch of interactivity. The user clicks on different tabs, clicks buttons, and so on. And you can't have that on a server component. So what we did here is we used this server component for the route. We got the trip, and now we're going to create a client component, which we can call it trip detail client, something like this. And we're going to pass the trip information as props so that it has the best of both worlds. It gets the information that was queried from the server, but also it will have all of the benefits of being a client component. So to do that, we're going to come here, we're going to go to our components folder, and inside of it, we're going to create the trip detail.tsx file. So in here, we're going to export default function trip detail client, and we're also going to declare this as a client component, and as a prop this is going to take in a trip detail client prop. We're gonna basically destructure a trip from it. Now we have to create this type since we're using TypeScript, so I'm going to define here interface trip detail client props. It's going to take in a trip. Now, a trip will have a type of trip from the generated Prisma type. Now, in here, we can import this component, and now we successfully can use the component. Now, it's still giving us an error just because we haven't returned any UI from it yet. So if I can just return this, you'll see that now that error will go away. Perfect. Now, let's build the UI for this page. I'm going to start with a div, which is going to have a class name of container, a margin X of auto, a padding X of 4, a padding Y of 8, and a space Y of 8. Then inside of this div, I want to first show the image of the trip. So I want to put it as like a banner. So I want to check to see if the trip has an image URL, because some trips don't actually have images. Now, if they have an image URL, I want to show this div that is going to, let me make it into a div, is going to include an image. Perfect. Now I need to import this image component from Next.js. So I'm going to say import image from next image. Then on this image, I want to make the source be the trip.image URL. The alt is going to be the trip.title. Now for the class name, I'm just going to make it be object cover. And I want to make it fill and also be a priority. So if we go to this page that we were before, I believe this one doesn't have any images, but this one does. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to switch to that page, and yeah, you can see we show the image. Obviously the image is huge now, but it will adapt to the size as we add more stuff. So let's start with this. So we're going to do a class name here. So let's make this a width of full, a height of 72. On a medium size, the height will be 96. The overflow will be hidden, and it will be rounded XL to make a huge border radius. We're also going to make a shadow on this banner. So I'll make it large, and I'm going to make it position relative. So now if I go here, you see it actually acts as a banner.
Now, below this, we go below the banner. We now want to show the header card. This will include information like, for example, the title of the trip, the start and end date, and also a button to add a location. We don't have the abilities to add locations yet. We don't have locations stored in a table, but we're going to do that in a second. So we'll start with the div here for the header. I'm going to make it class name BG white, P6 for padding, shadow. Let's make it have a border radius that is large. Display be flex. The direction will be flex column. On a medium screen, it's going to be flex row. And we're going to justify between. We're going to also set it to items start. But on a medium screen, we're going to set it to items center. Now inside of this div, what I want to do is I want to put another div that is going to be empty. And we're going to put an h1 tag that will include the trip.title. Then we're going to put a class name here, which is going to have the size of the text be 4XL. The font is going to be extra bold. And the color is going to be text gray 900. Below this, let's make a little div to show the start and end date. So in this div, we're going to have a class name of display flex. The items, we want to center them. And I want to make it text gray 500. Since I'm doing a lot of UI, I actually just opened up this section so you guys can see it at the same time. I hope this is better. But now for this, inside of this div, we want to put first actually, let's also put a margin top here of 2, just for some space. Yeah, and then inside of this div, what I want to do is I want to put a little icon that is going to be like showing that this is a date. So it's going to be the calendar icon. But to get this calendar icon, we need to import it. So import calendar from Lucid React. So it's like this little calendar over here. And below it, what I want to do is I want to put a little span that is going to define the size of this text to be large. And I'm going to put the trip start date like we did on the card in the previous file. So we're also going to do toLocale date string. And we're going to put a hyphen in between them. So we'll put the start date and then we'll also put the end date. Perfect. Now you see that there is a little bit of a too close space over here. So I want to put a class name on this div, which is going to make it a height of 5, a width of 5, and also a margin right of 2. Perfect. Now below this second div, I want to put another div for the button to add a location. Again, we don't have that functionality yet, but we can already start making the UI. So I'm making a margin top of 4, and on a medium screen, it's going to have a margin top of 0. Now, inside of this, I want to use a link. A link from, not from Lucid, it's going to be from NextLink. And we're going to do that little thing that we did with the other pages where we make a button. So we use that button UI that we created to add a location, but we actually just navigate the user through the link. Now for this href, I actually will create a route called the itinerary route. Now I don't have that yet, but I can already start putting the link to that page here. For example, that route is going to exist inside of the trips route. So inside of the trips route, but also inside of the trip ID. And it's going to be similar to the new trip page. It's going to exist like this. It's going to be a itinerary page, and then it's going to be a folder inside of it that is going to be the new itinerary. You know what I mean? So the actual route to it is going to look like this. It's going to be /trips because we're in the trips route. Then we have to put the specific trip that we're in, which is what we're rendering right now, which is the trip ID. So I'm putting the trip.id. And then we're going to go to the itinerary new so that you create a new itinerary, so a new location for your trip. Now, inside of this add location, I'm also going to add a little plus button, plus icon, sorry. So I'm going to import plus from Lucid React. And it looks fine, but let me just also add a margin right of 2 for some space. And I want to make the height of it be 5 and the width of it be 5.
Perfect. Now we're pretty much done with this section. We're going to handle, again, clicking on this and navigating to an actual route later. So what I want to do now is I want to make the different tabs that we're going to have in this page. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that if you remember in the trip detail, we have here 3 different things that we might want to see about the trip. The first tab is going to be an overview tab. It's just detailed information about the trip. The second one is the itinerary. It's going to be a list of the different locations you might want to go depending on which days on the trip, and you can actually drag and drop, move them around to change your itinerary. And the third one is going to be literally a Google Map location showing the trip that you're doing and pins through to every single location that you selected. So to do that, we're going to be using, we're going to make here a section, which is going to be, it's going to have a class name of BG white. It's going to have a padding of 6, some shadow to it, and it's going to be rounded large. So it's again another section, but this section is going to use the tabs component that we have in the UI folder. So if you remember, we added this UI folder, there's the tabs here, and that's really useful for us. So in this tabs component, we're going to have a tabs list, which is also from the same page. Then inside of here, we're going to have the tabs trigger component. And inside of this tab trigger, we're going to put the first tab, which is going to be the overview. So you see we have here a tab. Now, if I want to add more, I can just copy this and add 2 more. So I'm going to add a tab for the itinerary and one for the map. Now, you're not really able to select any of them and the UI looks kind of weird. So the first thing I want to do is on this tab list, I want to give a class name of margin bottom of 6. And then I also want to give a value to each of this tabs trigger so that when we select them, we know exactly which tab we're in. So for the tabs, for the first one, I'm giving it a value of overview. For the second one, I'm giving it a value of itinerary. And the last one, of course, is going to be map. Now, I also want to give a class name to each of them just to make the tab more visible. I'm making the text large. So I'll do the exact same thing for all of them. So it actually matches. Perfect. Now we have to find a way to allow the user to select which tab they want to go in and keep track of what tab should be in display, because you can switch between them, but it really doesn't actually select anything. So to do this, I want to create this state at the top over here. And this is why it's also important to have this as a client component so we can have states. And I'm making a use state where the name of it is going to be the active tab. It's just to keep track of what tab is currently active. And we're making a function called setActiveTab. It's going to be of type. And then there's 3 options, right? There is overview as an option. There is itinerary as an option. And there's also map as an option. So when we give a type here, we'll put by default the type overview. Now, down here at the tabs list, or actually at the tabs component, we need to pass a value to it. And we assign the value as the active tab. So by default, it's overview. And actually right now, we can't even switch them because we have to set a way to switch them. So the way we set that is we pass an on value change, and we just pass our state function, and that will actually update based on that. Now, I see that this is... apparently on value change doesn't accept us to just define the type like this. So I'm going to delete this and it should be good to go now. Yeah, perfect. And now we can actually switch and we are keeping track of the value of the tab based on this state. Now, how do we determine what to show? Well, let's first start by showing the tabs content for the overview. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to create the tabs content, and inside of it we're going to have a div. Now in this tabs content I need to define which tab this is. It's going to be the overview, so I'm passing a value of overview. You'll see that now whatever UI I put here is going to show inside of it because we're in the overview tab. I'm also going to give a class name of it of space y6. And in this div, I want to actually define a grid inside of the overview tab. We're going to define this grid, which on a medium screen is going to have 2 columns and a gap of 6. So inside of this div, let's start by adding an empty div with the trip summary title. So we're just going to say trip summary. And we're adding some classes to it where we're making the text be twice XL, and the font is going to be semi-bold with a margin bottom of 4 to give some space to the bottom. Now, below this title, I want to add another div for the actual dates again for this trip. So we're just giving an overview of this trip, which includes the dates for the second time. So in here, I'm adding a div, which is going to be a class name of space y4. Then we're adding another div, which is going to have a display of flex. And I'm setting the items to the start instead of to the center. Now inside of the second div, I want to put the icon for calendar again. And I want to style it a bit more, where I'm going to set in the height of 6, the width of 6 as well, the margin right of 3, and I'm changing the color to be gray. Then below this calendar, I'll put the div to actually display the dates. But the thing is, in this dates div, it's an overview. I'm going to actually show more than what we did for just this. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to add a p tag to say that this is where I'm displaying the dates. I'm giving some class name to this. I'm just making the font be a little bit more bold. I'm also changing the color to be a little bit gray, but also more gray than the icon. Then below this div, I'm adding another p tag where we're going to add a class name of text small, and the color will be the same as the icon. And inside of this p tag is where we actually put the date. I can just copy the date from what we did over here. So I'm copying this and I'm just pasting it here. But the thing is, we don't just want to display this dates like this. We actually also want to put a line break, which is going to include a rounded number for the amount of dates that this trip lasted. So to calculate that, you need to get the 2 dates and actually get the amount of days in each date and subtract them. So there's a little bit of a math that you need to apply here. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually inject some JavaScript, use the function map.round so we don't get any like a decimal amount of days. Then we're going to do trip.endDate.getTime to get the exact amount of time. Then we're going to subtract that by the start date. So start date.getTime. And let me make this more visible for you guys. So we're just subtracting the end date, get time from the start date. And then when we get both of these information, we're actually going to surround this with a parentheses. We want to actually transform it. So right now we have this value, right? But this is not in days. To transform it into days, we have to divide this by the value of the conversion to days, which is, first of all, 1,000 milliseconds times 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours. Because the value that we got here was in milliseconds. And obviously, how will you know how long a trip is if you get it in milliseconds? So to convert it into actual days, you do this. And you can see this trip is 85 days, which makes sense because it goes from, I guess, like August until November. Perfect. Now we obviously want to also give some indication of what this number means. So we're going to put days here at the end. Perfect. Now we're done with this small section where we show the days. But below this second div here at the end, we're going to add the next part to this overview section. And this part is going to entirely depend on the destinations, the locations that the user want to add to this trip. So we're going to start by just building the container for it, but we're going to actually have to migrate into building the page to allow a user to create a location. So I'm going to set this to display flags, item start, then I'm going to leave it as it is. So what we want to do now is we want to allow a user to select places in the country or in the trip that they're doing, or even in multiple countries if that's the trip that they planned, and add those locations into the trip. So how do we do that? Well, let's look at the trip model. The trip model looks like this right now, which means that there isn't anywhere to store the location. So what I want to do instead is I want to come to our code and I want to change the model a bit. I want to create a new table where the user is going to be able to store their locations. And each location is going to be associated with a specific trip. So what is a location? Well, let's define here a model for a location. So a location obviously is going to have an ID, right? Just like a trip. But also it's going to have like the name, so location title. And that's going to be a string. So like, for example, if you want to add to your location the cathedral in Spain, then you can put that's the title, right? Now, we also want to be specific with the location. So we want to get the latitude of the location, which will be a float, and we want to get the longitude of the location, which will be a float. Now, also, we want to associate this location with a trip, similar to what we did here with the trip to the user. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to create this trip association, which is going to be an association to the trip type. And the relation that we want to make is we're going to associate the trip ID that we're going to have to create down here. So trip ID is going to be a string with the ID of the trip. Also, I want to keep track of the order. Now, what is order? Well, in a location, in a trip, you usually go into locations in order, right? You maybe go to the cathedral first, and then you go to the museum second. So we're going to keep in order to actually plan the trip. So we're getting this order info. It's going to be an integer, and we're also defaulting its value to 0, meaning it's the first thing. Now, we're also going to add a created at, which is a date time, and it will default to when you create the location. Now, it's still giving us an error here, but that's because we have to create the association to a location in the trip model. Because as you can see, we said that a location is associated to a trip, and a trip is associated to multiple locations. So I'm going to say that the trip model now can have locations, which is a location array. Now we want to migrate these changes. So I'm going to come here and I want to run npx prisma migrate dev. Now when I run this, hopefully everything should be fine and we should see those changes in our table. So it's asking us for a migration name. I'm going to say add location, press enter, and yeah, let's check to see if Neon has the new table, and of course it does. Yes, it does. So we have here the location, and also you can see that every trip now also has a location array. Now let's go back here. We want to also generate the Prisma client types for this. So I'm going to say npx prisma generate, and it should generate the types. Perfect. Now let's delete this and let's go to this homepage again. So what we need to do is we need to show the locations in a map. But to do that, we actually have to have some locations for this trip. So I want to start building this add location, this itinerary new page where we can actually add a location, and we're going to be using the Google Maps API for this, meaning that the user will just write a name for a location. They don't even have to write the exact name for the location. Google Maps is going to find a location that looks like that one, and it's going to save that in their database, in our database, with the latitude and the longitude for that location. So what we want to do is we want to go here to our code, and I want to go to the page that we created, the new itinerary, and I want to create a page.tsx for it. Now in here, let's export default function, and this is going to be called new location. Now this whole component is going to be a client component, so use client. And now this component is going to be a server component because we need here the params. So I'm going to say params again from the type params is equal to promise, and we're going to get the the same type, the trip ID from the params. It's going to be a string. And then down here, I want to get the trip ID from awaiting the params. Now it's giving us an error in the await because I didn't make this into an async function. Perfect. Now we got this. Now what I want to do is I want to again create a client equivalent to this component so that we can have a form inside of here where the user can create a location. So I'm going to return here a new location client. And it's going to take as an argument the trip ID. Now we're going to create that file over here. So let's make the trip our new location.tsx. We're going to use client and we're going to export default function new location client. And we're going to make it have an argument of trip ID, which is of type trip ID, which is a string. That's all we're passing. Now inside of this, and we're going to import this so we can actually start seeing the UI. Why is it giving us a, oh yeah, because we still have to return something here. Yeah, and now this should work. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to open up the view again. So what we want to do is we want to show a form inside of this new location component. So I'm going to make this into a div, and this div will have the following class name. First of all, I want to make the size of the height of the screen to be min h, and then calculate the size of the screen including the navbar. So I'm going to do a calc 100 vh minus 8 rem, just to set it exactly the size of the screen. Then I'll make a display flex. I'll center the items. We're going to also justify the items to the center and set the background to be gray 50. Then inside of this, I want to add another div, which will have a width of full and the max width to be medium and a margin X of auto. Then inside of this, let's add another div with a BG white. And obviously all the classes will become a lot more obvious when we actually start seeing changes. So we just see this little square over here, but you guys will understand what it does. But we're setting a shadow of large, and I'll make it also rounded large. Perfect. Now we just have to make that a lot bigger because we're going to add the form inside of it. So I'm going to do h1 over here. We're going to say add new location. Now inside of this, we're going to add a class name of text 3XL. The font is going to be bold and the text will be center with a margin bottom of 6. Now below this, we want to actually add the form for creating a location. We're also adding just a quick class name to this, which is going to space out all of the items in the form with a 6. Then inside of this, we want to add a div to wrap the first input and label, which is going to be the address. That's all that we need from the user. We just need them to put the address for where they want to go or which location they want to go. And even if the address is not 100% right, Google Maps is going to automatically understand. So we're going to do name, address, the type is going to be text, and we're going to make it required. Now let's also put some class names to this. So I'm going to make this have a class name of block, text small, and I also want to make it a font medium because the title is too bold. Then let's change the color to text gray 700 and a margin bottom of 2. Then for the input, we also want to add some class names to it. So I'm going to say class name here, and we're going to make it be a width of full. Then I'm adding some border because right now you guys can't even see the input. Then we're making a border gray 300. We're adding a padding on the X direction of 4 and a padding on the Y direction of 2. It will make it a lot bigger. We're also rounding the corners. And when you focus on it, I want to make it outline none. Yeah, so the outline is gone. But also, when you focus on it, I want to add our ring to effect. And I also want to specify the color of it. So I'm making it focus ring blue 500. But also, one thing is this should be centered in the screen. So what I think the error is that when we have this calc over here, we shouldn't space them out. Yeah, now it's actually centered on the screen. Perfect. Now we have the only input we need to have in this component. We just want to add a button to submit this form. So I'm going to actually create here, this is going to all be through an action, a server action, like we did with the creation of a trip. So I want to use here the const is pending and start transition. We're going to use the use transition hook. So let's say use transition, and we're going to use this is pending to conditionally render the text in this button. So we're going to say if is pending is true, it's going to say adding. And if it's false, then it's going to say add location. I don't know why I tried creating a new file, but yeah, add location. Perfect. Now we also want to make this button be of type submit. And let's add a class name to it, which will make the width be full. Perfect. Now this is all that we need to do in this page. In the form over here, we're going to have an action, and it's going to call a server action. So we need to get the form data like we did in the trip creation. It's going to be of type form data. And in here, we're going to call the add location function. And in this location, this function, we haven't created it yet. We're going to pass the form data plus the trip ID. And that's why we needed the trip ID in this file. It wasn't used until now, but you guys know why. We need to pass this to the add location server action, which we're going to create in our actions folder. Just real quick, we need to wrap this around with the start transition so that the transition actually starts. So what I want to do is I want to run, I need to make this twice, and then I need to wrap this around with the start transition. And we'll just put this in here. Perfect. Now let's create the add location action. We're going to come here. We're going to say add location.ts. And the first thing I'm not going to forget to do is use server. Perfect. Then we're going to export an async function called add location. It's going to take in the form data, which is a form data type, and it's going to also take in the trip ID, which is a string type. Now we can save this and import it in this file so it stops complaining. Now let me just focus on the server of this for now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get to see if the user is auth. So we're going to say const action is equal to await auth. We're going to get that from the auth file. So if the user is not authenticated, then again, we want to throw a new error that is going to say not authenticated. Remember, we did exactly the same thing with creating a trip. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to get the address that the user put in. So we're going to say const address is equal to form data.get. We're going to get the address. We're going to also convert this address to a string. Now, if there isn't an address, we need to say that this is missing an address. So I'm going to throw a new error again, but it's going to say missing address. Now, finally, we can actually get that information. But how do we do this? Well, based on what the user put, we want to use the Google API to get the geolocation of this address. So we're going to create here a function above this, and it's going to be called async function geocode address. And it's going to take in an address and it's going to return back a latitude and longitude value for the best match of that address. Now, to do that,
we need to have an API key for the Google Maps API. Click on Get Started and you will be prompted with creating your account. Then you should go to your project and go to Keys and Credentials. In here, you need to add the credentials for the Maps platform. To do that, you can just search here Maps API or Maps platform. As you can see over here, click on it and enable the API and you will get the API key. Now the Google Cloud API platform, in my opinion, is very, very complicated, but you guys will get there. Just do this and create the credentials. Then you'll see it like this. I'm not gonna show my key, but you'll see your key just like this, and you will copy that information and you're gonna go to your Visual Studio Code. We're gonna go to our .env.local, and in here, we're going to add a Google Maps API key. Now, when you add that, I'm not going to show myself adding because I don't want to show the key, but you add that key over here and we should be good to go. Then when you have added your key to your .env, we want to come to the geocode address and I want to get the API key. I'm going to set it equal to process.env.google maps API key. Now we're going to assert that it exists and we're going to make a fetch request. So we're getting the response and making a fetch request to the Google Maps API. Now this is the API URL that we want to put. It basically makes a request to the Google APIs/Maps API. We're using the geocode function, which I just explained. You pass an address to it, it tries to match an address to it and gives you back information about it, including the latitude and the longitude. So we then add the API key in the end so that Google knows it's a valid response. And when we get that back, we want to get the data from it. So I'm going to say await response.json. And we're going to get back the latitude and the longitude of the data.results. We're going to get the first result from it. And we're going to go for geometry.location. Now, the reason I'm not explaining what each of these means is because it's just specific for the documentation for the Google Maps geocode API. If you want to check it out, go ahead and check the documentation for this API. But you can get a lot of information, not just the latitude and longitude, but this is what we need for this video. So we're going to return that information, the lat and the longe. Now we're successfully using this. So when we come down here, we can get the latitude and the longitude from the geocode address function when we pass the address. Now we also want to await this. And after this, when we have this information, we want to add this location to our table. So I'm going to say prisma.location.create, and I'm going to pass some data to it. Now the location model is pretty simple. The first thing we need is the address that the user tried to create. So address. The second thing is the latitude. The third thing is the longitude. And we need the trip ID, which we have from the function argument. And we also need to have the order. But the thing is, it defaults to 0, but also when we add a new location and we already have some locations already created, we don't want to default that one to 0 because it will screw up the order. So what we need to do is we need to know the order of the last location or the amount of locations in our table. So what I want to do is I want to get a count of all the locations for this specific trip. So I'm going to say await prisma.location.count, and I'm going to count where the trip ID is equal to the trip ID. When we get that information, we're basically going to set the order equal to the count. Now, you might be wondering, shouldn't we set it to count plus 1? Well, not really, because if you remember, when we created the schema for our Prisma for location, we defaulted that the order starts at 0, not at 1. So that's why we're not adding 1, because it will start at 0, so the count will be an extra number. It's kind of like using the ordering of arrays. So when we finish this, we want to redirect the user to the /trips/ And then we're going to actually not use double quotations. We're going to use backticks. And we want to redirect them to the trip with the trip ID. Perfect. Now we should be successfully creating this location. Let's check to see if it works. So I'm going to come back here. We're going to go to our trip over here. And since this is a Brazil trip, I want to add, let me think of a place in Brazil. I'm going to think of actually my hometown in Brazil. It's called Salvador. So I'm going to put a place there that I know exists. But the thing is, it's not a specific location. I didn't put the postal code. I didn't put anything. We're going to click add location. So we got an error. Let's check to see what happens. It says that it can't read properties of undefined reading count. So for some reason, location here is not being properly handled. Let's check to see if the location was added. Seems like it wasn't. So it might be an issue with the Prisma client. Let me go to the add location. Let's check it out. So apparently there was no error. I just figured it out. I just had to kill my server and run again. I don't know why that was the solution, but sometimes in NextJS, that's what you have to do. So let's try creating the thing again. I'm going to say arena fonte nova. I'm going to put add location, and we got redirected to the home page. So, or to the trip page. So it seems like it has created. Let me refresh the locations table. And yes, it seems like it did. Now, do I know if this is actually the latitude and longitude for that location? Not yet. But when we pin this to a map using this longitude and latitude, we should be able to know. So now we successfully allow the user to add a location, but what do we do with it? Well, the first thing we have to do is we need to tell our trip page, right? This page over here, to when we get the trip information. So if I go here to, I believe it's trip ID, this one over here, right? The trip detail page, we get the trip, but we never specify that we want to include the location information, because when I console log this value, right? I'm going to console log the trip info. Let's take a look at this. So you can see here that I get this information. So I get the user ID, I get the information about the trip and so on, but we don't get the locations associated with the trip because we never told this query to include those associations. So to do that, I need to come here and I have to tell this query to include the locations association, and I'll set it to true. Now you see that when I fetch this, let me just inspect the element, not view the source, inspect the element, and I refresh this page, we should see that now it also includes a locations array with all of the locations associated with this trip. Perfect. Now that we have that information, we want to pass it to the trip details client. Now when we go down here, and we're inside still of the overview, here's where we do something with it. So the first thing we do is we're going to add a map pin icon from Lucid React. And I'll make the screen like this again so you guys can see the UI changes. But I want to put a class name of h6, width 6, margin right of 3, and text gray of 500. Now we have this little pin. Below this, I want to add the destinations that the user is going to, or the amount of destinations, which is the locations. So I'm adding a div and I'm adding a p tag that will say destinations. Then I want to put another p tag, which will say the amount of destinations. So to do that, we actually want to show the number of locations. So trip.locations. Why is it not? Oh yeah, because it extends the locations value as well. So what I actually want to do is, before we break all of that, remember how we set the type of this to be trip? Well, trip doesn't have locations, so we need to extend this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an interface called trip with location, and I'm going to set this equal to, but to do that, what I actually want to do is I want to convert this into a type. And I'm going to set it equal to the trip type intersecting this new type, which is a field called location, with the location type. So we actually need to get this over here. And I hope this works. Let's check it out. To do this, what do I have to do? Oh, I have to change. No, this is trip details props. Oh yeah, in this over here, I need to probably export this type. So I'm gonna export this type, and then in here I want to cast this type to be trip with location. Actually, it seems like that's not it. So let me delete this. Let me read this error. Oh, okay. That was stupid of me. This has to be locations, and it should be a location array. Yeah, okay, that worked. And then perfect. Yeah, so now we have access to the location here. And with that, I can say trip.locations.length and get the length of the destinations that we have created. So we obviously only created one destination for this trip. So this is why it appears here as one. But also I want to say here after this, the word locations. But also if it's just one, it doesn't make sense to say one locations. We have to do that little hacky thing that we did with the trips. So we have to say if trip.locations.length is equal to 1, then we're going to say location. But if not, we're going to say locations. Perfect. Now, if it's 2, it's going to become locations. Now we go 4 divs down. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And below this, we're going to add a div to actually show the map. Now, what is this map? Well, the map is going to be a real-life interactive Google Maps map, which is going to have a pin on each of the locations that we add for this trip. So we're going to add a div here. I'm going to just add some styles to it. Let's call it H72. So it's a big map. Let's make it large so it has some space. I'm also going to make it overflow hidden, and we'll add some shadow to it. Perfect. Now inside of this, we want to show the map. It's going to be a component we're going to create, and inside of this component, I want to pass the list of itineraries, which is just going to be the list of trip locations. Now we have to create this map component. So in the components folder over here, let's create the map.tsx. And inside of here, let's export default function map. And let's define the type to have itineraries, which we're going to define this actual map props type. Let's create it up here. Now, we already have the type for this. Let's say the interface map props is going to be of type itineraries. It's kind of a hard word to spell. And the type will be location array. Now we have to define this function, right? And in the end, we have to return some sort of UI. Now, we are not doing anything with this itineraries, so that's why that's giving an error. But this means that now if we import this, why is it not importing? Did we import the map? Oh, I think it's used. Yeah, we didn't. So let's just import map from @/components/map. Perfect. Now it shouldn't give us an error. Now we don't have any UI attributed to it. And it's also saying that itineraries type is not proper. And the reason is just I passed the wrong name. Yeah. This should look like that. Yeah, now it should work. But the type is indeed failing. And of course, I know what this is actually. This location type, this wasn't imported. I think it was conflicting with the TypeScript location type. We need to actually import the location from Prisma. And yes, now it should work. Now let me delete all of this because I feel like it's just adding clutter to our thing. Let me go to the map page. And in here, we're going to have to use the React Google Maps library. This is actually a pretty cool library and it's going to facilitate everything from us. So we're going to import Google Map from @React Google Maps/API. We're also going to import the marker component and the use load script component. It's not a component actually, it's a hook. Then inside of here, we want to first start with the use load script. So I'm going to say const is equal to use load script. And because this is in the client, I need to define actually here in the client, and we're passing this value here to this component, we need to make the Google Maps API key be public. So we're going to pass here a value. It's going to be called Google Maps API key. And you have to create this environment variable called next public Google Maps API key. Now, when you create that, it is going to be accessible. We also have to enforce the type here, so that gets away. And I'm not gonna show myself creating it, so I don't show my other API key, but I have already created in my file. Now, on this useLoad script, we wanna get the isLoaded and the load error. This is just information that we need to know for if the Google map is actually loading correctly. Now, in this return statement over here, we want to return the Google Map component. Inside of it, we want to pass the map container style, and we will pass a container style type. Now, what is that type? Well, we don't even have to create an external object. We can just define it here. We're just setting the width of the map equal to 100% of the div that it's in, and the height will be equal to 100% of the div 2. Now, it's still, it's saying Google is not defined because it's loading still. So what we want to do is we want to do if is not is loaded, return a message saying loading maps, so that we get some like UI showing that it's loading. So it loads for a bit and then it actually starts showing Google Maps. Now, it's not showing anything yet because we haven't specified, but you can see it actually loaded. Also, if there's an error, we want to say if load error, then return a div that is going to say error loading maps. Now, we don't see any of that appearing, meaning that it actually loaded correctly. Now, we also want to zoom into the map and center everything to a specific location. More specifically, we want to center the map to the itinerary locations, right? So we want to find like the longitude and latitude of the first location of the itinerary and center it there. Now, before I do that, I'm just going to zoom a bit. I'm going to say zoom 8. And I want to find the location of the center, which we're going to call the center, but it's just going to be the first itinerary. So we're going to create this variable called center, and it's going to be equal to itineraries, which I keep spelling wrong. It's probably wrong, the spelling here too. I don't know. I'm sorry if it is. But yeah, we're going to get the length. And if it's greater than 0, meaning that there is a location, then we're going to create this object, which is going to have the longitude and latitude of the first location. Obviously, to get that, we're going to just actually show the itineraries array, get the first element of it, and get the latitude for that. And then we'll do the exact same thing for the longitude. So we're going to say longitude and longitude here as well. Perfect. Now, we have to put an else case. So if there isn't location on the itinerary, then we'll just have to center the map to literally nowhere. We're going to center it in the world. So latitude 0 and longitude 0. Perfect. Now we don't see anything. Why? Because we haven't passed this into the map. So to tell the map to center to this location, we're going to say center is equal to center. And you can see that now it actually shows the Google map. More specifically, I also now know that it correctly found the location I was trying to look for. This is in Brazil. This is the city I was born in, and I lived for 18 years of my life. And it kind of found it. The place I put was a football stadium that is, I'm not finding it. It's around here, okay? It's probably around here, I'd say, actually. But yeah. Oh, it's here. Yeah. So it kind of found the location. Perfect. So now we know it's working, but we want to be able to pin the locations in the map based on the locations that we saved on the table. So how do we do that? Well, to do that, it's actually going to be pretty simple. We have the latitude and the longitude of all those locations. So we want to loop through them inside of the Google map. So itineraries.map. Each location, we're going to get the location and we're also going to get the key. And for each location, I want to render a marker, which is a component that we imported over here at the top. Now a marker is going to literally be a pin to the thing. Now I'm passing a key to it, which is the key of the array. Then I want to pass the position to this marker. And the position is going to be like this. It's going to be the latitude and the longitude of the location. So I'm going to say location and location. And you see that I already got the pin over here. This pin just shows exactly the location that I told you guys, which was the stadium. Now also, I want to put here the title. So title is going to be equal to location.location title. And you'll see that whatever the user typed, when I click on it, I need to be expanded, I think, you should be able to see that information. Perfect. Now we have successfully rendered this map, and we can actually reuse this map everywhere in our project. Now I want to add another location. I'm going to add this place here. It's a shopping mall, just so that we have two pins at the same place. So I'm going to say shopping Salvador. I know that this is the name of the shopping mall. I doubt that there's a different one. Yeah, perfect. So we have two locations in the same place. As you can see, they are both pinned. So if you're traveling, you kind of have the pins of each location, and they should be in order. Perfect. Nice. So we successfully added the map. So what I want to do is I want to go to the trip details page where we rendered the map. And I also want to add the case in which there are no locations. So if trip.locations.length is equal to 0, then we want to display some UI that will let the user know that they should add a location. So I'll say div, and I'll close it. So close the div. I'll add some class name to it. I'm making the text be centered and the padding be 4. And this won't apply here now because we do have a location, but in other trips, we will be able to see this. Then I'm going to add a p tag here, which will say add locations to see them on the map. Then we can come down here. Let's add a link, which should include a button similar to the one we have up here. Actually, I might just copy that one. So let me just copy this, exactly the same link and button, and it should appear down here if necessary. Now we're pretty much done with this tab's content, which is the content for the overview. But we just need to add the final one, which is the description of this trip. So below the check for the locations, let's add a div that will describe the description. So I'll put here a p tag, and I'll render the trip.description. And you see, it just says for me trip to see my family. I want to just apply some minor class names to this. I'm making it gray 600, and I'm making it leading relaxed. And now this is how it will look like. Perfect. Now it's time to make the itinerary tab. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to basically get out of this tab's content and add a new one. So tabs content. Now on this tab's content, we need to pass the value for the itinerary. And then I'll add the same class name we added on the other one. I'm making it space Y6. Now this one is going to be a bit different from the overview. What we need to do is we need to show the list of all the locations and each day in the order in which we save them. Each location has an order, and the order corresponds to the days. Now you can make this a bit more complicated and specifically include the times and all of that. I wanted to keep it a little bit more simple, so that's why I made it each location that you add is a different day. But by the knowledge you gain from this tutorial and what we do so far and what we do, you will be able to build that extra feature on your own if you're interested. But in our case, what we need to do is we need to add a div here. And this div will have a class name, which will say display flex, justify between, items center, and I'm also adding a margin bottom of 4. Now inside of this div, I want to add an h2 tag that will say full itinerary. Perfect. And then I'm going to add a class name to this, which will say text 2XL, font semi-bold, and this should be good to go. Now, I just realized I wrote itinerary completely wrong. So it should be this, and this should be with an I2. That's why I'm not seeing the UI, but now that we fixed it, we can actually see the UI. Now, we can add more stuff to this. Like, for example, I want to add the same link button as we had, just in case the user wants to add a new location. So I'll put this below the H2 tag, just like this. And then we want to add the actual list of locations. So what I'll do is I'll first check to see if the locations are empty. So I'll say, actually, we have this check here as well, right? I'll just copy this. So we'll do this. If it's empty, we need to show some sort of text. I just realized that also we don't need this button if we're going to add this here. So I'll delete this button. And in case we need to add a location, they'll be here, right? And I'll change this to say add locations to see them on the itinerary. Perfect. Now, we don't want to make this into just a logical operator. We want to turn it into a ternary operator, because if there is locations in your list, we actually want to render a new component we're going to make, and it's going to be called the sortable itinerary. Now, this component is going to be a component where it's going to show the list of all the locations we're trying to go, and we can drag and drop them to move them to change the order. So in this component, we need two things. We need first the locations, which we're going to pass through the trip.locations. And we need also the trip ID, which we're going to pass through the trip.id. Perfect. Now we have to create that sortable itinerary component. So in the components folder over here, I want to create a component called sortable itinerary.tsx. Now inside of here, let's export default function sortable itinerary. Now again, we need to pass some props here. So it's going to have locations and a trip ID prop. We're going to build the prop interface for this. I'm going to just call it sortable itinerary props. And then we're going to render a component in here, which I'll just start with an empty fragment. Now in this sortable itinerary props, I want to create an interface with that value. And the props for this is going to be locations, which will be of type location array, like we did for the other component. And the trip ID will be of type string. Don't forget, location is hard to auto import. We need to make sure we choose the correct one, like this one, and get it from our generated folder. Now we have the correct information. We just have to import that component over here. And if everything is right, we should have no errors. So let's go to the itinerary and let's start building this sortable itinerary component. So in this component, we're actually going to be using a drag and drop library, the most popular drag and drop library out there, which is React DND. To use it, we're going to do import from at DND kit core. And what we want to import is the DND context, the closest center, and the drag and event, which we'll go over what each of them does. But also we want to import from the at DND kit sortable, and we want to import a couple things as well. We want to import the array move function, the sortable context, the vertical list sorting strategy, and the hook use sortable. Now, what we want to do here is in this component, I want to return the DND context. So I'll return the DND context and wrap our entire component tree that is inside of this component with this context. Now in this context, we have to pass three things. We have to pass an ID, we have to pass a collision detection, and we have to pass an on drag end. Now for the ID, to get an ID that is random, making sure that it's always random, we're going to be using the useID hook from React. It's pastoral, is specifically good for situations like this. We'll just then pass the ID here. Now for the collision detection, we're going to pass that closest center that we imported. Now for the handle drag end, we're going to create a function here called handle drag end. It's going to be an async function that is taking an event, which is called a drag end event. And we want to just create the function for now and pass it down here. Now, inside of this D&D context, we want to pass a sortable context because drag and drop is only meant obviously for, drag and dropping stuff. It doesn't necessarily need to be sorted, but we are making a sorted list. So what I want to do is I want to pass here a sortable context and it will wrap around our list. Now in the sortable context, I need to pass two things. The first thing is a strategy, and the one that we want is the vertical list sorting strategy because it's a vertical list. So now we need to create a state that is going to keep track of the state of our locations as we move them, right? By default, they're going to be in the order that it comes with based on the value order that each location has, right? It has, it's hard to show here. I think it's here. Yeah, each of them has an order, right? It's going to be sorted based on that. But we also need to change it in our component state. So I want to create a state here called local location. I don't like that name, but it makes sense. It's just the local value of our location. And the function is going to be called set local location. We're going to make this into a use state. And the default value is going to be the locations. Perfect. Now in this sortable context, we have to pass the items to it, which is the actual list that we want to pass by default. So the list that we want to pass by default now is going to be this copy of our locations list called the local locations. But we want to map through them so that we only keep the ID of each of the locations, because that's what the sortable context needs. So we're going to loop through each location. I'll just call this LOC. And for each location, we only want to pass to this items prop the location.id. Perfect. Now it's giving us an error still because we have to pass some sort of UI inside of it. It's wrapping something. So what we're going to wrap is a div. And inside of this div is going to be the list of the locations in the itinerary. So I'm going to pass a class name here to space each location. Remember, they're going to appear vertically with a space of 4. Now to actually show the locations, I want to loop through the local location array, map through it, and for each item with a key, I won't return like curly braces, I'll return parentheses, and we want to return a component we're going to make called sortable item to facilitate not having to write the UI here. Now the key is going to be equal to the key, and the item is going to be equal to the item. So we have to make this sortable item component. We haven't made it yet. So we're actually going to make it above this sortable itinerary component. Let's make a function called sortable item. And this requires us to pass one thing, which is the item. Now the item is going to have as a type a location because that's what we're looping and passing over here. So the type for this is going to be location. And then what I want inside of this component is I want to return each individual item of the list. So here we should be looping through the locations, which are 2, but we're not returning anything yet. If I were to just return the title of the location, I could do item dot, it seems like it's not using the correct location here. It seems like it's not using the correct location here. Oh no, it is. Oh yeah, we have to do this. Sorry. We have to define the type is equal to location. Now, if we want to just display the location title, I can just do this, and you see that now the itinerary includes the list with the 2 items in the itinerary. But the thing is, again, we want to make it such that when I drag one of the items, I want to change the order. And also we want to make it look a little bit better. So what I want to do is I want to first apply some class names to this. We're going to make the padding be 4. We want to make the border be present. And then I also want to make the border be rounded, display of it be flex, let's justify between. Then I also want to set the items to be centered. And I realized that I put rounded wrong here. It should have a U. Then because we're interacting with the items, I also want to put a hover effect. So when I'm hovering an item, I want to apply some shadow and it gives this cool effect. I also want to make it a little bit more transition. So I'll make a transition shadow and then it will have a little delay to it, as you can see. Perfect. Now let's go down. Inside of this div, I want to apply another div, which will have an h4 tag, which is going to include the title of the location. So I'll say item.location title like we had before. I also want to apply some minor class names to this. I'll make it font medium, text gray 800. And below this h4, let's make a p tag that will include the latitude and longitude, which, I mean, you can include if you want to. I mean, if you're a random person looking at this, maybe you're not interested in that, but I'll add it since we have that information. So to add it, I'm going to actually make a template string. So I'm writing latitude is equal to, and then I'm inserting the value for item.lat, and then I'm adding a comma, and I'm going to put longitude, and I'm adding the value for item.longitude. It should be LNG. Perfect. And it looks like this. Now, obviously, I want to make this text a bit smaller. Also want to make it gray. So I'm going to do text small. And I want to make it text gray 500. I also want to truncate it and do max with extra small. I just had to change this. Perfect. Now for the title, I think we're fine with this. It looks fine. But you can see we're not able to actually move them. Not only that, we're not, like, we know that this is first and this is next. If you go to our neon table, we should see that in the orders of the locations, if I refresh this, the order of the second day should be 1 and the order of the first one should be 0. But the thing with that is that we are not displaying that order. So we want to display that order below this div over here. I'm going to make a div here, which is going to say day, and then it's just going to display the order of the item. So it should start at 0 and then go to 1. Then on this information, I want to just make it text SM and make the color gray. Perfect. Now let's make it such that you can actually move through it. How do we do that? Well, to make it sortable, we want to add the use sortable hook. So I'm going to set this equal to use sortable. Now in this hook, we need to pass an ID to it. So the ID that I'm going to pass is just the ID of the location. Then inside of here, we're going to get a couple of things. We're going to get the attributes, listeners, set node ref, which is a function, the transform, and the transition. And we're going to use all of them in order to make this work. So the first thing that we have to do is on the top div over here, we want to pass a lot of properties to it. So the first property that I want to pass is a ref. Now the ref I want to pass here is the set node ref that they give us. The second thing is we want to pass the attributes. They provide that for us. So all we need to do is we just have to destructure them like this. The third thing is the listeners. Again, they give it to us. So we just have to destructure them like this. And finally, I want to pass some style to this. So I'll make it style. And I want to pass an object here. There's going to be two properties. One is going to be the transform, and the other is going to be the transition. Now the transition, we already have that value. We got from the use sortable. The transform, we can choose specifically how to transform. We're going to say css.transform dot toString, and we're passing the transform inside of it. Now, it's not allowing us to do this because this is not the correct CSS value. The correct CSS value that we need to use is from a package called @dnd kit/utilities. And now this should be good to go. and we can actually drag the items and switch. But the problem is the switch never actually happens. But you can see we can actually move them around, right? You see, the problem is we're not actually telling our backend to save the new order whenever the drag and dropping ends. So in order to do that, we have to come to this function that we created over here called handle drag end, and we need to make the changes in the order be permanent. This function will only be called when the drag and drop ends. So when I move a location to another order. So here's what I need to do. In this handle drag end, we're going to get a couple things from the event. So we set this equal to the event, and we want to get two things. We're going to get the active and the over. Now, what does this mean? Well, we're basically trying to check to see if the dragged item has moved. And if it has, we want to update our local state to reflect this new order. And then when we update our local state, we also want to call the backend to actually operate the change in order and persist over our database. So we'll start by updating the local array, the local order. The way we do this is we check to see if anything has changed by checking the ID of the active. And if it's not equal to the ID of the over, then there was a change. Now we have to find the index of the moved items. So I'm going to get the old index, which we can get through the local locations find index, and just find the specific index of the item where the, I hate when this appears in front, I'm sorry. The item.id is equal to the active.id. That's how we find the old index. Now, when I look for the new index, right? I'll just change this to new. We do the same thing, but we get the ID from the over. Now, when we get both of them, I need to rearrange the items to locally update their order. So I'm going to create a new array here called new locations, or new locations order. Set this equal to array move. An array move is going to allow us to easily move the array to rearrange the order. So the first thing we put here is the local locations. Also, I see that we have an error here, but we want to enforce that over has an ID and it's not null. So we're going to put this exclamation mark. So again, the first thing we put here is the local location array, which is the local state of our ordered locations. And then I want to pass the old index and the new index. Then what I want to do is I want to map through those items and just change the order. So I'll map through them. I'm going to get the item and the index. And for the item, what I want to return back into this new locations order array is a new array of locations, but the orders are changed. Not only the array has moved to a different location, they actually also changed the individual order inside of the object. So what happens is, if I were to change this over here, just like that, and I just set local location equal to new locations order. Let's see what happens. So I have this as first and this as second. When I move this here, you see that it actually switches, right? This is brought over here, and this it stays here. I can actually keep switching them. If you look, it doesn't look like it because the UI looks kind of weird when it moves, but it actually is switching the values. But it's wrong because the day value here, the order, isn't actually changing. So what we have to do is we have to locally change this value of the order. And also the value in the database isn't changing as well. The way we change it locally is we do this. We map through them, we look for all the items, and then we return the item, but the order now has the index. So this is how it should look like. We map through them, keep the item, and change the order. So when this mapping is done, we again set the local location equal to the new locations order. Now, if we go here and we switch, you see that it actually switches the value. You see, this one has a value of 0. And when I switch it to here, the same thing now has a value of 1. It still looks a bit weird, but it is actually working. Now, the only thing we have to do left is actually make this change work in our backend, because our location here isn't changing at all. So to do that, what I want to do is we want to create a function or a server action that is going to interact with our database. So to do that, I'm going to create this function called reorder itinerary, just like this. And I'm going to require that we pass the trip ID here. And we also pass the new order, which is going to be the locations, the new locations order, sorry. And we're going to map through each of them and just pass each item.id. So that's all we need. We just need to know the IDs of the items, because then we know the order. We also need the trip ID, and we're going to make this function inside of an action. We're going to call it reorder itinerary. Perfect. Now in here, we'll start by making this a use server. Then inside of here, we're going to export an async function called reorder itinerary. And we're passing a trip ID, which is a string. And we're also passing the new order, which is going to be actually a string, an array of strings, because it's just the IDs that we need. Then inside of here, we need to first do the same thing we did on all of our other server actions. Let me actually copy it. We just check for authentication. That's all we do, right? And we need to import this auth function, but that's it. Now, that's all we have to really check, because when we pass this check, now we can actually update the location to have a different order. So the way I'm going to do this is I want to accomplish the change in order through a Prisma transaction. So a Prisma transaction is basically an all or nothing execution. By using a transaction to make this happen, it ensures that all the updates either complete together successfully or fail together. So if this fails, we will know and nothing will change. So the way we do this is we await Prisma, and we need to get the Prisma from our package, dot, and then $ transaction. Now the transaction is going to look like this. We're going to pass the new order that we just got. We're going to map through each of them, and we're going to get the ID of the location, which is going to be a string, and also the key, which is going to be a number. Now the location ID is just because, if you remember, what we pass to this reorder itinerary, which by the way I have to import, is just the IDs of the new location order. Now in here, we're looping through them. We're getting for each item the location ID and the key, which is just the index. And then for each of them, I don't want to put curly braces. I want to run a prisma.location.update. So in this way, we can actually run with a transaction, we can run multiple updates, because remember, when we change the order, we're not changing the order of only one item in the table. We're changing the order of multiple items. So we're running multiple updates, and if one of them fails, the other ones fail as well, because we don't want to change the order of one and not change the order of the other, if that makes sense. So with this update over here, we want to specify that we want to update where the ID, and I want to save this so it makes it easier for you guys to see, where the ID of the location is equal to the location ID. And the order now is going to be this. We're going to pass a data property here to specify what we want to update. And what we want is update the order to be the key. Perfect. And now, if everything seems to be working, let's go back over here. We see that the location order is the first one over here has an order of 0. The second one has an order of 1. Now, if I change this, we obviously see the change locally, but do we see the change here? This should swap. And did it? Let me see. It might have swapped in order here as well, but I'm not sure. Let's swap again. So the shopping one, it's 1. So the shopping one should be 0 next time. Let's see. The shopping one should be 0. Yeah, it's 0. So it is working. It's just that they're swapping places, if you know what I mean. Perfect. So we got this to work. We now have this successful itinerary that we can swap. We have our map over here. And the last thing we want to do is just make this map a bit bigger and appear over here. This is just, I thought it was just that I think having the map be bigger instead of just having the summary here could also be pretty good. So to do that is actually going to be pretty chill. We're going to go here to map and we're going to close this. We shouldn't have closed the trip details. We should keep this. The thing is now we're going to add a new section, a new tab content. We're going to actually copy the tab's content for the first one and just paste it down here. Now we're going to change the value from overview to map. Now we're kind of just seeing the same thing, but that's not what we want because we're going to delete a lot of this. So we're going to delete all of these things over here and we're only going to keep the map. Now we also need to delete this part over here and we want to delete as well this section over here. Perfect. And now we just see the map appear over here and it's pretty centered. That's just so we can make the map bigger. If I open this up, you can see that the map is a lot bigger in this view than on this one, which is a lot smaller. Perfect. That's all I wanted to do. Now to finalize this page, I just want to add a back to trips button down here. It's pretty simple. I'll just come below the divs over here. I'm going to add a div just so that we can go have an easy way to go back to the trips, to all of the trips. We're going to add a class name. It's going to be text center, so we can center the button. And then I'm just going to copy this logic here for the links with the button. But instead of going to a specific trip, I'm going to go to the trips page. And also I want to change this from saying plus to just saying back to trips. Perfect. And yeah, now when I click on this, we should navigate back. But one thing we haven't done yet is we haven't been able to click on this and actually go to the specific trip page for this. We actually build the whole trip page without having to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the trips component. It is this page over here. And when we loop through each of the trips, when there's a link to each of them, right? If you remember, we created a link, but we never passed an href. So what we want to do here is we want to pass a link to the trips / and then we're going to insert the trip.id. And now what happens is when I click on this, it actually navigates me to this page. Let's see what happens if I go to the Japan one. There's no map, there's no locations, right? So it's very boring. Also, there's no picture, and this one as well, I think it's very boring as well. So it's nice when you put a picture and you actually fill it up with your information. Perfect. Now I think it's time for us to add the final part of our project, which is the globe page. I added this page out of just having fun with this project, and I think it adds an extra layer to it because it makes you actually have to work with 3D animation and 3D objects, which is something that if you're going to put this on your resume, it's pretty cool to have. So I just wanted to make this page. If you don't want to, you don't need to. But if you want to, here's how you do it. So we're going to close this up over here. And we're going to create the new globe page. So I'm going to come to our app folder over here. And I'm making a new folder called globe. Now inside of here, let's make a page.tsx. And we're going to make this into a client component. Then we're going to export default function, call it globe page, and we'll just build the infrastructure to put the globe in. We'll start with that. So I'll return here a div. This div is going to include a class name, which is a minimum height screen. I also want to make it a bit cool, so I'm making a gradient from white to a slightly not white, so a gray 50. You barely even notice. Then I want to add another div, which is going to include a container class name. So container, and I'm mx auto, a padding x of 4, and a padding y of 12. Now inside this div, we have another div, which is going to include a class name of a max w7xl and a margin x of auto. Then Inside of here, we're putting in a heading, which will just say your travel journey. So we can actually start seeing something now. And I want to make this definitely more of a title. So I am making it center, like complete center of the page. Also, let's make it huge. So text for Excel. And let's also make the font be bold with the margin bottom of 12. So it has some space from the globe. Then we make the globe section. So I'll create here a div, and we're going to put a class name. It's going to be a grid. Grid calls one. So we have one grid, one column for the grid, and then we're also making it large, be 3 columns. So grid calls 3 with a gap of 8 in between them, and we start the items. Perfect. Now below this, I want to actually build a section. So I'm gonna make it on the large screen. I want to make the amount of columns, that the span in between the columns will be 2. The background will be white. So there's a bit of a difference in between the background with the gradient. We're also making it rounded XL. And I want to make it have a shadow large. And an overflow of hidden. And I know none of this is visible right now, but just wait till we actually add the content inside of it. So I'm making this class name be padding 6, so there's a lot of space. So you actually start seeing stuff. Then we're going to put a title. So see where you've been. Like a mysterious text. We're making this bigger as well. So text to XL. The font will be semi-bold. And let's put more space between the globe. Then I want to put a div here. And this div is going to include a height of exactly 600 pixels, because that's what I chose for the globe. When you're working with the globe, it's hard to make it fully responsive, but I think this looks pretty nice. So then I'm making it width full and relative as the position. Inside of here is where we're going to put the globe. But to do that, we have to import this package called React Globe GL. This is what's going to give us our beautiful globe and all of its functionalities. So we're first importing the globe and also the globe methods. Then we have to make a ref of the globe. So I'm going to say const globe ref is equal to use ref, not use rect, but use ref. And we want to pass it as undefined initially. Now the type of this ref is going to be the globe methods or undefined. Then I want to use the actual globe and put it inside of here. So let's render the globe. I'm calling the globe and I'm closing it. We shouldn't really see anything yet other than this ugly looking ball. We haven't actually put the shaders for the globe and all of that, but we have to start by putting a ref to the globe. So I'm going to set a ref and set it equal to globe ref, which we created. Then we have to pass a bunch of properties to the globe. Now, a lot of the properties are going to be in the code in the description, all of them, if you want to check it out. I'm just going to paste them here. This is what we added to actually make the globe look like a real globe. It includes the globe image URL, which you can get from this URL over here. The bump image, so that it actually looks like, you know, it's kind of 3D and stuff. You can get from the same link. I set the background URL to be black and also the background color, sorry. And I also set the point color to be this hexadecimal color over here. Now, again, you can change some of these properties. Like I can make the width be 2000 and then, yeah, it just kind of breaks it. But you can play around with this to whatever matches your website more. But this is what I chose for mine. Now, this is cool and all, but like, what really is this? You might be asking. Also, did it just break when I made it bigger? Probably. There's more that we have to put here as well. Yeah, it's kind of broken when you make it bigger. So let me just keep it small for now, but we're obviously going to make it work at the end. So the first thing that is an issue is we want to make it auto rotate, right? We want to make it keep rotating as we go. And to make that happen, it's actually pretty simple. Through the global ref, the globe ref that we created, we can pass a use effect here. And the use effect is going to set the globe to auto rotate. So we'll check to see if the globe ref is not undefined. So if globe ref.current, then we can set the globe ref.current.controls, and we can set it to auto rotate equal to true. You'll see that it will start auto rotating no matter what. We can actually control the speed of it. So if I want to make it super fast, I could set the auto rotate speed. So I can set this value to be like 50. And then if I refresh this, it's going to actually be a lot faster. But obviously we don't want that. We want to make it pretty nice and slow. So I'm going to make it 0.5. I'm going to refresh this, and it has a pretty nice speed. So now what I want to do is I want to make a pin to every country that I visited. So it's a bit different here. Like previously, we're getting actual locations, but here we're getting countries, which gives us more broad information. So what do I mean by that? So what we want to do is we want to make an API request to get the locations of the trips, and make sure that we get the locations of all of our trips, and keep track of all of the countries that are included in those locations, so that we can kind of make a map of all the places we visited. So the way we do this is we're actually going to make an API route in our API over here. So we're going to make a folder. We're going to call it trips, and inside of it, we're going to have a file called route.ts. And inside of here, we're going to export an async function, which is a GET request. Now let me make this bigger because we're not touching the front end for a bit. We're making an API endpoint that is going to make a Prisma call to find all of the countries that the user has visited. Now, the reason why we're not just making it directly here is because this is a client component and we can't just call Prisma from there. So the first thing I want to do is I want to try and catch. So let's do a try catch. And the first thing I want to try is I want to check to see if there's an error. Actually, we've done this a billion times. So I'll just copy this. I'll paste it here. I copied the wrong thing. I'll copy this and I'll paste it here. And I want to import the auth function, but also when we don't have a session, we don't want to throw an error. We actually want to return a new next response, and it will be an not authenticated with a status of 401. Now, if the user is authenticated, then we want to fetch the locations. Now, we didn't necessarily store the countries in which the user visited in the list of locations. We just stored the location title, the latitude and longitude. But based on the latitude and longitude, we can actually get the country. So first, let's get the actual locations. So I'm going to do const locations is equal to await prisma.location, and we have to import this. I don't know why I didn't auto import. Prisma.locations.find. Wait, did I import the right one? Yeah, prisma.location. Oh, location, not locations. Perfect. .find many, because we're looking for many locations. And I'm going to make it, I'm going to check to see where we only get the locations where the trip and the user ID of the trip is equal to the session.user.id. So we only get the IDs, the locations where the trip the location is part of was made by the user who's logged in. After this, we want to specify what parts of this information, of this data, we want to keep. So we're only going to select here the location title. So we're going to make that true. The latitude, we're going to make that true. The longitude, we're also going to make it true. And we're also going to keep the trip title. So I'll make it trip, and I'm selecting the title. So we can actually specify with Prisma what we get back in this array. Now, why did we get all of that? Because now we want to create this new version of this, which is going to be called the transformed locations. Now in this, we want to use a promise.all because we're making a lot of requests at once. We want to make a request to get the country based on the longitude and latitude for all of the locations that are returned here. So that's why we do the promise.all, because it's the most efficient for it. So I'm going to run locations.map, and for each location, I'll have this async call, which will give us the location. And for each of them, I want to first get the country. So I'll get a geocode result. We're going to create a function that is going to return the geolocation information based on the information we give. And we're going to call it the get country from coordinates. And to get that, we need to pass the latitude and the longitude. When we get that back, we're going to get this geocode result. Now from this geocode result, we're going to return a new object, which includes the name of this place, which is going to be the location title. So lock.trip.title. And it's going to include the actual address of the location. Now, how do we get the actual address? Well, it's going to be formatted for us through the geocode result. I know we didn't make this yet. I know this object hasn't been made yet, but when we do, we're going to have access to a formatted address. Then we're also going to pass the latitude, which obviously will just be the location, the latitude, the longitude, the same. But also the country, more importantly, which we'll again get from the geocode result, not country. Now, what the hell is this geocode result? Well, let's make it be something that gets returned from this function that we want to create. So this function we're going to create it's going to be a server action. We're going to create here. We're going to call it geocode.ts. And in here, we're going to export an async function called get country from coordinates. It's going to require a latitude, which is a number, and a longitude, which is also a number. Now, we're also going to keep track of the geocode results. So remember, we're returning two things. So geocode result, we're going to return a country, which is a string, and a formatted address, which is also a string. Now, we're going to say that this function is going to return a promise with the geocode result. Now in here, let's start by getting our Google Maps API again, because we need to use the Google Maps to make this work. So to do this, I'm going to go to the add location and this over here. We're going to copy this and we're going to paste it here. So we're still making an API request to the geocode API, but instead of requesting the address, we're going to actually, instead of passing an address, we're going to pass the latitude and the longitude. So I'm going to change this to lat long, and now we can pass both values inside of here. But the way we pass them is we have to pass them with a comma in between them. We start with the latitude, so I'm going to insert the lat here, put a comma, and then I put the longitude here. Now we still want the key and pass the API key, and what this should give us is the geocode information based on a latitude and longitude. Now, when I get the information, I'll get the data. So I'll await response.json, and then I want to get the result from this data. So I'll say data.result, and I'll get the first item that is returned. Now I want to first get the country component out of this result. And unless you've looked into details of how the Google Maps API documentation looks like, which I had to, you won't know exactly how the data is structured, but all you need to know is that to find the country, you get the component of the country, which you can get by accessing the result.address components, and you find the component in which the types of it includes country. That's the best way that I found to actually get I really wish that the API was better with this and made it easier. Also, I'm just going to make this be honestly of type any, because it's hard to know exactly the type of this. But this should return back the country component. Now, the address formatted for us is already pretty chill to get, so we don't have to do anything crazy with it. And all we do in the end is we return the country, and the value for country is going to be country component dot long name. So we get the long version of the name of the country. If not, if there's nothing, then we actually have to default to unknown. And that's it. But hopefully there's always going to be a successful found for the country. Now for the formatted address, it's literally just result.formatted address. And now we successfully created this function, which means that we can import it over here. And we now have access to that information, which we now map to every location and create the transformed locations. Now, why did we need this? Because now on this API route, what we can do is we can return a next response.json, which will include the transformed locations, meaning that the user can fetch this information. It will get all the locations the user has visited around every single trip they've done, which will then return a transformed version of that, which includes the actual formatted address of the location, plus the trip title and the country in which that trip happened. Now, if there's an error, I want to just return new next response, and I'll just make it into an internal error with a status of 500. Perfect. Now we can close this and go back to our page. In here, we're going to have another use effect, but this one is going to fetch the data for the locations. So I'm going to have here a state. It's going to be called visited countries. Now I'm going to create a function called set visited countries. And this state, even though the name might imply it's going to be an array, it's actually going to be a set. Now, why am I using a set for this? Well, because if you're not familiar with data structures, a set is like an array, but there's no duplicate values for it. So if you try to add a duplicate value, it automatically doesn't add it. It's fine, you know? So why are we doing this? Because if a person did a trip to Japan and they added 9 locations in Japan, that means then there's 9 Japans on an array. So we only want to keep it once. So the easiest way to do this is just turn this into a set of strings, and then it will do it automatically. Now the initial value is going to be how you initialize a set, which is by just saying new set. Now in this use effect, we want to fetch the locations. Now obviously this is going to be async, so we have to make a function out of it and then call that function. Now in this fetch locations, we're going to try and catch any errors. And in this try, what I want to do is I want to get the response from the fetch request to our API/trips/locations. Now in here, I want to get the data, and I'm going to await the response.json. When I get back that data, we're going to extract the information of the unique countries. So to do that, I'm going to create a list called countries. And I'm going to set that equal to new set of strings. And I'm just going to pass the data from the API request, and I'm going to map through each of the transformed locations. Each of them obviously is going to give me back a location. And for each of them, I'm going to return back the location.country. Now, this type is incorrect. It shouldn't just be location like we had from Prisma. It should actually be transformed location, which we're going to create over here. Call it transformed location. It's going to have a let, which is a number. It's going to have a launch, which is a number, a name, which is a string, and it's going to have a country, which is a string. So now we actually have type safety for this, and we could even export this if we wanted and use it on the other file as well. Now we got the countries. So what do we do now? We just set the visited countries equal to those countries. Remember, the whole point where we use a set is just because even though we're mapping through each of them and there might be repeated ones, just the fact that it's a set, it will automatically delete the repeated ones. Now, if there's any errors, I want to just console the error so I personally can just see it. I don't think there will be any though. Now, also, I want to make a loading state for this code. So I want to create here a state. It's going to be called isLoading and set isLoading. And we're going to set it equal to useState, which will start as true. But then when we're finally done fetching this information, which by the way, please put an empty array here so your thing doesn't just blow up your API. When we do that, we're going to have finally here, which is just going to set the isLoading to false. Even if there's an error, it's going to be set to false. No matter what, that's what the finally statement does on a try catch. Now, what we can do is on this globe check over here, instead of just showing the globe initially, let's put a loading spinner before it. So I'm going to say if isLoading is true, then I'm going to show a loading spinner. If not, I'm going to show the globe. Now on this loading spinner, I'll just make a div and I'm going to close that div so it autocorrects. Then I want to add a class name to this div, which is going to be display flex, items center, and justify center. I'm also making the height full. Now to make an easy spinner with Tailwind CSS, we're just going to add a div here, which is going to just close. I don't know why it's not self-closing. Then the class name we're going to apply is the animate spin. We're also setting the rounded to be full. We're setting age 12 and width 12, a border B of 2, and a border gray of 900. This should make a circle that is kind of spinning infinitely. So let's go back here. Now if I refresh this, it shows a loading spinner and then the globe. But there's definitely an issue, as it's obvious. It's cut in half. That shouldn't be happening. So there's definitely a class name that I forgot to add. So I'm going to find it and I'm going to fix it for you guys. Perfect. I just found the issue. It was really stupid. I wrote calls span instead of call span. Yeah, so fix that please. And then you'll get this beautiful screen over here. You see we also get the loading spinner for a second, and then we see the globe. Now, the loading spinner was just for this real quick, but also because now what we can do is we can display the list of countries in a section down here. So inside of here, I'm going to add a div, which is going to display the list of countries. So I'm going to put class name on a large. I'm going to do call span 1. I'm going to add a card, which not a car, a card, which will have a sticky top. So sticky and a top of 8. And then inside of this card, I want to put a card header, which will just show a card title with the countries that I've visited. So countries visited. Now inside of this header, I want to put a card content, and we'll start by adding the same loading spinner that we just added over here. Now we're not going to put a double globe. I'll delete that because that's not what we want. What we want to show, well, if it's done loading, is the actual list of countries. So I'm adding a div here, which is going to have a class name of space y4. Then inside of this div, I want to add another div, which is going to have a class name of bgblue50, a padding 4, and rounded large. Then I'm going to add a p tag that's going to say you've visited. And then now, because we only kept the non-repeated countries, we can actually show the information correctly of how many the user has visited. So how many countries the user has visited. So in here, I'm going to say span and I'm just going to display the size of the set. Instead of a length in a set, you have a size. So I'll say visited countries.size. And this is what we should see. You visited 0 countries. I guess that's wrong, right? Ooh, that's wrong. So there's definitely something that we need to fix, but we'll fix in a second. We also want to make the class name here be font bold. And I want to make this p tag here have a text small and a text blue 800. So it looks pretty nice. Now, I just realized why we screw this up. So when we made the API request, the API route we made is not trips.locations. It's just trips. So if you caught that, then good. I'm sorry about that. I'm just so used for us working on locations and trips and all that I got confused. So we technically just have to fetch API/trips. And if everything works out now, we should see at least the correct number of countries. We don't, but at least I know that that's not the issue. So guys, I found the error. The issue is with our get country from coordinates. I said data.result. It should be data.results. So my bad. If we come here now and we refresh, we should now see, yes, perfect. Now the data is working and we have no more error. So fix that real quick. And I'm sorry about that. So let's go back over here. We now have successfully, let me actually add more trips to this, let me add a trip to the Japan trip. So let's add a location here. I'm going to say, what is a location in Tokyo? I'll make the Shibuya crossing. That's a location. If you guys know about Tokyo, that's a location in Tokyo. Let me add another location now. Universal Studios Tokyo. Actually, is it in Tokyo? I'm not sure. I'm just gonna say Japan. And yeah, it figured it out. I don't think it's in Tokyo. Good thing. Oh yeah, it's in Kyoto, right? I don't know, to be honest, but good thing we didn't specify. But yeah, so we added more locations. So if I go now to globe, we should see that we visited 2 countries. Amazing. So now we know that it's working. So what do we want to do now? We want to go down here and actually list out the countries. So below this visited countries size over here, actually, let's put after this pen, let's just make it say countries. So it looks more coherent. Yeah. Actually, let's give some space to it as well. So an easy way to do this is to just add this space over here. And yeah, it will now add this space there. Perfect. Now below this div over here, we're going to add another div that is going to loop through the countries. I'm going to add a class name, which is just going to put some space in between them. I'm going to max the height to be 500 because worst case scenario, if there's too many countries in the list, we'll just overflow. So overflow y auto padding right of 2. Now, inside of this, we need to actually loop and sort the countries. I actually need to make the countries set into an array. So I'm going to convert it back into an array. So I'm going to say array from, and I'm just going to pass the set. And then I'm going to sort it, and I'm going to map through each country. Now for each country, I want to render this div, which is going to include the map pin icon that we already used twice, I think, and a span with the name of the country. Now, without any stylings, this is what it looks like. So it actually shows the name of the country. But to apply some styling, we're going to first put a key here, which is going to be key. We need to get the key from this map. Then I want to add a class name, which is going to be flex for the display, items center, a gap of 2, the padding of 3. We're going to round the thing large. And when you hover it, I want to make the background of it be gray 50. And I'll make the transition colors. And I'll also add a border to it, which is going to have a color of border gray 100. Let's see how this looks. Yeah, looks pretty nice. Now, let's add some styling to the pen. very simple. Make it smaller because it looked huge. And I'll also make it red, 100. Slightly red. Looks like Airbnb logo. But it should be a bit more. Yeah, perfect. Then on this pen, I'll just make it more bold. So font medium. And perfect. We now have a list of all the countries we visited. The final thing we need to do is we need to add the pins to this globe, which we haven't yet. Now, that is actually not hard at all. Literally, not hard at all. we actually is 99% of the way through. What we have to do is, when we get the data right over here from the locations, remember when we got information like the latitude and longitude and the name and all of that? Well, that was actually useful because we're going to create a state called locations. Let's create here a locations state and set locations. And it's going to have a type of useState. And the type is going to be transformed location array. It's going to start as empty. Now, when we get back the data, we want to set the locations to be equal to the data. And now we have this list of locations that are perfectly useful for our globe over here, because this globe accepts a prop called points data. And with this points data, we can actually put the locations where we want to pin. So that's why we added the, let me refresh this. Yeah, so now we have a pin on every location that we selected. You can style this pins. I thought that this was fine, but you can style it. You know, this is where we actually style it. So like, for example, this can become a different color. I can make this RGB 25500. It will still be red. Actually, let me make it green. And you see now it's green. But I prefer it to be red, especially that red that I had before. And yeah, that's how we pin every single place. So this is basically it. It's not that hard to actually pin the locations on this 3D map. Also, you can go pretty deep inside of it. Actually, you can even go inside of it. No. Yeah. I mean, it's the first time I'm using this library. I'm gonna be honest. The GlobeGL, I've never needed to use a library like this before. But yeah, pretty cool stuff. Now, you might be wondering, if we're done, what happened to this page? Well, I decided to leave this page to last. This is just a landing page for the website. I built the landing page and it's purely UI. There's nothing extra. So that's not the point of the video. If you want, I will give you guys the code for building this page. It's in the description. I'm actually gonna copy and paste the code for this page right now. And you guys can copy it if you want to or not, but it's going to include a pretty nice UI with a gradient, a title, a hero section, and so on. So I'm going to copy paste and I'm going to come back in a second. And this is it, everyone. So I just pasted here the code for the landing page. This is how it looks. The code is very simple. I'll have the link over here. Nothing different from what we've been doing so far in this video. The only thing that I would say is a bit different is, so this is a server component, right? It's the landing page. We get information about whether or not the user is authenticated. And what I did here is I made it such that if you are logged in, as we are over here, this check it out button takes you to the trips page. But if you're logged out, it is actually a login button, including this one at the bottom, that you can click and actually logs in. But you might be wondering, well, if you are in a server component, how did you add a button that has an event handler? Well, I didn't. I made this auth button over here, this component. It exists on the components folder. And literally what it does is it creates a button. And if the user is authenticated, then the user actually is redirected to the trips page. If the user is not authenticated, they log in. That's all I do. And then inside of here, I also change the text of the button to check it out if the user is logged in, and to the login text with the GitHub icon if the user is unauthenticated. So that's basically it. That's all I did for this page. I didn't really want to waste time here just because this is already a very long video and some people sometimes complain about how long some videos are. So I wanted to keep this part very short because we definitely did a lot for this project. I think this is a cool project for you to play around with. It's a cool project for you to build and expand on if you're interested in it. It has a lot of functionalities. It has maps. It has 3D stuff. It has a bunch of drag and drop stuff. And overall, you should just become a better full stack developer if this is one of your resume projects or one of the projects that you're building in order to improve your skills. So what I wanted with this project is that it uses a very specific tech stack. We're using NextJS, we're using Prisma, we're using Postgres. That for me is the ideal tech stack. And that's why we are sponsored in this video by Neon, which is the solution I always use whenever I need a Postgres database. They also have a bunch of other things that I didn't even mention. So the main thing for me is that if you're building a real project, Neon is serverless and it handles auto scaling for you, meaning that if you are having issues, your databases are going to instantly scale with zero downtime for your users. Also, the fact that, first of all, it has a very generous free plan. That's what we've been using for this whole project. But also, if you are going to pay for Neon, you only pay for your usage. So if you end up having to automatically scale during like peak loads, you are only going to pay if you actually scale up. One thing too that I've seen that they have that I haven't been able to experiment with yet, but I've heard a lot of good things from, is that you're able to instantly create database branches for isolated development. So like if you have a testing environment, if you have a staging environment, if you have a development environment, you can have a different database for each of them. And it's very easy to branch off your databases for depending on which environment you're in. Now, the reason why I'm telling you all of this is obviously they are sponsoring this video, but also I really love their service. You've seen me using Neon before, so I'm not just saying this because they're sponsoring this time. I highly recommend them. If you want to check them out, click the link in the description because you will then also help support the channel. So thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you, Neon, for sponsoring this video, and I see you guys next time.